The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by XChair, the XChair chair, office chair. XChairTom.com is the website, XChairTHOM.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at thomsbeats.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Thom, Thom. We're reading today from Warrior Is by Harley and Robin Zephyr. It's the story of their great-grandfather who, in real life, killed Custer at Little Bighorn. And in fact, there's a map of the war, as it were, the battle. And they say that he is now the spirit keeper of Custer, which is remarkable. And there's a page-and-a-half introduction to the book, and then it becomes, a historically accurate novel, basically. This story is the traditional and cultural account of the life of Nikogju Lakota warrior Mato Nyanpi, saved by bear, which his name in English, also later known as Scarleg. Warrior is based upon a true story. What you are about to read has been told to us through our family, passed down as oral history from generation to generation. Every family has its own story. This is ours. It's up to you to visualize and experience the events described herein in order to determine what you believe or what you choose to accept from what you learn from these pages. You've likely never read a story quite like this before. In Warrior Is, the reader is able to visualize and experience the events and circumstances of Mato Nyanpi's life. Many times the story is told in the present tense, such as if you were walking with Saved by Bear and his people as the events unfold. This was our original manner of storytelling. Other times the story is narrated in the past tense to account for a past perspective. Those of us who may not be entirely fluent in particular words or specific language as much as we may be fluent in spirit and honest communication, the life messages many times can be more meaningful than just the written or spoken words. Warrior Is follows the timeline from the time of creation, moving through Saved by Bear's birth in 1849 and going up to July 1876, 2 weeks after the Grass Battle. Please exercise your free will and follow your conscience when reading this story. The spiritual side is called upon you to open your spirit so that you may read this tale and learn about these events through your own spirit. And, continues sort of like in that line, but here, right to the book. Prologue. He smelled the yellow of the sun. His spirit was alive and energetic. He felt the energy in his chest and all along the blood running through his veins. He looked to his left to see his great friend by his side. The strong scent of sage caressed his nostrils and reminded him of home. The movement over the high-running hilly ridge to the south caught his eye. He and Swift Bear sensed and felt the pathway opening up. So much had occurred so quickly, so suddenly, so dramatically. Their call to duty, his call to duty, filled his mind, his heart, his spirit. Today, it was meant to happen. It was presented to the people from the Creator. The plan was made. the warriors summoned. The preparation was done. It all led to this place, this portal in time. The sparse clouds to the west resembled mare's tails, and for a brief moment he remembered his white stone friend in the White Mountains. He remembered his spiritual commitment to protect his people, Grandmother Earth, and the sacred Hisapa. And time stood still for a moment, a small moment in time, through all of the ancient and original history of all the moments of time. And as the group of the horse-mounted soldiers rode briskly over the far ridge, the Creator shined that warm, nurturing light upon these warriors, such as Creator had been doing since the beginning of time, since the beginning of Grandmother Earth and Grandfather Sky, and at the beginning of all things. All the moments of time forever had arrived here, now. It had come to this. Creator's strong will and great invisible hand had placed them here. It was the Creator all along. It always was. It always would be. For one to know what led the young Lakota warriors to be here at this fateful site near the Greasy Grass River on this warm, sun-drenched day, one must go back in time, way back to the beginning, when it was only the Creator, and the Creator of all things decided to create a new world. Her name would be Unsimaka, Grandmother Earth, and she would be created to hold and sustain life. All kinds of beings, all kinds of people would be given and placed upon and within her to show her love of life. And this is how it all began. Chapter 1, Origin. The human beings evolved from the spirit. Before arriving in Wind Cave, we were star people. Many of us came from a place called the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, an ancient star grouping and constellation that contains worlds comprised of the gift of life-giving water. Water is life, Mini Wikoni. The Pleiadian influence is an absolute, but those of us who claim to be relatives of the Pleiadians share a common bond with other indigenous people, regardless of where we are geographically on the earth. We will always remain Pleiadian star people. Spiritually, we have become human beings of different races and ethnicities, but the origin of our spirit is the water. And for us, and as to who we are, as the tribal people in a family way, our name is Minkoju, its evidence. It means life's subsistence through the gathering and planting by the waters and or river. The Minikochu spend their lives living by the waters. This is something that many of our own people do not know or understand, but this is our history, not only of our physical existence, but also the history of our spiritual existence on Unsimaka. The book is Warrior Is by Robin and Harley Zephyr.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. And it's Wednesday. Normally, Congressman Mark Pocan is on in this first hour taking your calls for the hour. That will be tomorrow because he's got work to do in the U.S. House of Representatives, which happens from time to time. So it'll be Middays with Mark, Thursday edition tomorrow. And right now, Will Bunch is with us. He's the senior writer for the Philadelphia Daily News and the political blog Attitude, and the author of numerous books, including Tear Down This Myth, The Right-Wing Distortion of the Reagan Legacy, one of my absolute favorite all-time books. And if you haven't read it already and given 3 copies to all your, or 30 copies to all your Reagan-loving friends, please do. And The Byrne Identity, a search for Bernie Sanders and the New American Dream. His website is attitude.com, ATTYTOOD.com. And you can tweet him at Will_Bunch, just like mine is Thom_Hartmann. Will, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Tom. Hey, it's good to talk to you again.
It's great having you with us. You wrote a piece about
reality.
Yeah,
Reality Winner.
Reality Winner. Thank you. It's
hard to forget it. It's hard to forget a name like Reality Winner.
It really is.
I hear you.
But I managed to, or at least a piece of it. And yeah. I thought that this was just an extraordinary piece. That this young woman who, well, first of all, tell our listeners and viewers exactly who was Reality or is Reality Winner and what did she do?
Yeah, she's sitting in a county jail cell now, waiting to get sentenced to serve out the rest of her 5-year sentence in a federal prison. Yeah. She's a young woman in her late 20s, I want to say 29, I think, from Georgia, an Air Force veteran. Interestingly, she worked on the drone program for the Air Force, and I think developed some moral objections to that, which she can't speak about because her work was very classified. But when she left the military, she ended up going to work for a contractor, partly because of her top security clearance. Meanwhile, she was like most of the people listening to the show, she was pretty horrified by what was happening in this country. She was kind of horrified by what she was learning and hearing about Russian interference in the election that she felt wasn't being publicized. And a little bit more than a year ago, I think it was May or early June of 2017, she got a hold of an NSA classified top secret document that really showed that Russian penetration of electronic voting systems was more serious than the government was trying to let on. And she leaked it. The memo got published on the website The Intercept, which is, I know a hot button. Half the people in the world love The Intercept and half the people hate it, but that's where it was published. And she was immediately identified as a leaker. She was arrested, charged with violating the Espionage Act, which was passed during World War I to convict spies, but now gets used against whistleblowers trying to expose government wrongdoing. And and under the Espionage Act, it's almost impossible to mount a defense. You can't present evidence that you did this in the public good, or that it didn't harm national security. If you turned over a classified document, you're basically guilty. And she was kind of forced to plead guilty to this a lesser charge, and was given a 5-year and 3-month sentence, which, by the way, is the longest sentence, assuming she serves all of her time and isn't commuted like Chelsea Manning was. It'll be the longest sentence of whistleblowers ever served in American history, basically.
Right.
And the reason why I wrote the column this week, even though her plea deal was a couple of weeks ago, a couple reasons. But one is the Mueller indictments that came out last week really had a big dose of what she was trying to warn people about in terms of these Russian agents who were working on our election and their success in getting into election systems. And when she leaked this document, a lot of state election officials didn't know the extent and were actually given a warning saying, yes, you need to check your systems and update for this kind of attack that was what she leaked, basically. So, I mean, she essentially did a public service. She tried to warn people about the extent of Russian interference, and she's behind bars. And a lot of people who know about it think it's an injustice. One thing that really surprised me when I wrote this column yesterday, I was kind of stunned to the extent of which people had not heard at all about this case until I wrote about it.
It got virtually no coverage in the corporate press.
It didn't. It's very weird, and it's funny because, I mean, you would think this story really dovetails with the whole conversation we're supposedly having about journalism being the enemy, being the enemies of the American people, and just Trump's wanting to put, him and Jim Comey talking about putting the head of a leaker on a pike, and Trump is very eager to prosecute people for leaks, and he did. They prosecuted Reality Winner and gave her just an impossibly severe sentence.
Although wasn't it during the Obama administration that she was arrested?
No.
So
she was arrested in 2017.
So it was after the inauguration. Okay. And by the way, in the piece, since you bring that up, I did talk about the fact that Obama's record on whistleblowers was awful. Right, and James Risen and all that.
Yeah, I mean, eight whistleblowers were prosecuted under the Obama administration, which was a record. And he had run on a promise to reform. He was going to do a Whistleblower Protection Act to encourage whistleblowers, and he did the exact opposite of what he promised. It was very disappointing from Obama, who I think generally did a good job, but I think that was one of his biggest failings.
But back to Reality Winner's specific warning. Here's a woman with a top secret clearance who's watching in real time from a contractor's perch as Russian hackers are getting into our voting systems. And I'm reminded of how Don Siegelman lost the 2002 election for governor of Alabama, which I think is one of the biggest scandals in recent American history. He had won the election. He went to bed governor, And in the middle of the night, one election official, who was also the head of the Republican Party in that county, sat with his vote tabulating machine and noticed that 15,000 with a 000 people had actually not voted for Bob Riley, the Republican. They had actually voted for Don Siegelman, the Democrat, even though they voted for all Democrats, all down ticket. And suddenly those 15,000 votes got flipped on that one machine by that one guy in that one district at 1 o'clock in the morning. And the next morning when Siegelman woke up, Bob Riley, the Republican, whose campaign manager, Laura Canary, or her husband, Bill Canary, was Laura Canary was the federal prosecutor, that George W. Bush appointed, and her husband, who was the campaign manager for Bob Riley, was also Karl Rove's best friend in college. And so when Don Siegelman started complaining about the election being flipped electronically, they threw him in prison and, in solitary confinement. It was on this show, in fact. He came on this show to talk about it, and they threw him back in solitary confinement for another 6 months because he came on this program and talked about this. I mean, it's just amazing how deep they tried to bury that.
Yeah, I mean, God bless you for saying that story. I knew Don Siegelman. I actually worked in Alabama as a journalist in the early 1980s when he was on his way up politically, and just a good person. And what was done to him was a travesty. But the flaws and the potential for abuse in our electronic voting systems are just talk about systems blinking red.
Yeah, and that's where I was going with that. Is if a political hack in rural Alabama can alter the entire state election electronically, and the Russians can get into 20 some plus states' electronic systems, then certainly the DNC or some sophisticated group hired by the DNC, like the RNC, the Republican Party.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it could be the DNC too, for that matter. I mean, if the Russians can hack it, if a political hack working for Bob Riley in Alabama can hack these systems, then any idiot can hack these systems. And it flips me out, or what concerns me, Will, is that this story is constantly being put in the frame of evil Russia, rather than the frame of look at how vulnerable we are. Russia's trying to mess with our elections. In all probability, so is China, so is Israel, so is Saudi Arabia. So I mean, you could go through the list of countries that are overtly lobbying in the United States and supporting political candidates, or occasionally covertly. Any one of them would have an incentive to do this.
I think you and your listeners would be very interested in thinking about a development that just happened in the last 24 hours, which is down in Georgia. You had this Republican named Brian Kemp, who is the Secretary of State, who just with President Trump's over-the-top support won the Republican primary there, and it's going to be in a kind of a fascinating race this fall for governor of Georgia. But what's interesting is, Secretary of State, he oversees the voting systems in Georgia, and they've had a huge problem there with people are very concerned about the security of their electronic system, and a bunch of activists actually filed suit earlier this year trying to get the electronic voting records from this Brian Kemp's office and a state university that actually manages the servers. And the day after the lawsuit, the servers were wiped clean, basically.
Wow.
So we don't know what was on those servers. And it's interesting now that this guy is he should be in big trouble for this, but instead he's in line for a promotion, right? He's running for governor and probably has a slight edge because Georgia's a fairly conservative state, not as conservative as it used to be. But there's a lot. There's legislation in Congress that would require paper ballots, so you don't. I mean, I just think a situation where you have an all electronic tally is just an invitation for abuse, for fraud, you should have paper ballots. I think you should have regular audits so the public can feel reassured, because I think right now the public doesn't have confidence in our voting systems.
Yeah. And with good reason, apparently.
Right, and that's just destructive for democracy overall. I mean, if you don't have if you don't have faith in your elections and that the people who are getting the most votes are actually winning, then you're not going to have much faith in your democracy.
Yeah, well said. So we need to check this out. By the way, did Reality Winner find any evidence that the election outcome was actually altered?
Well, I think there needs to be more investigation. I mean, you can there's no evidence of votes being flipped, but you can monkey with people's registrations. They show up at the polls. They're not listed.
Lots of ways to change an election. Will Bunch is his website, Attitude, ATTYTOOD.com, and hang on just a second.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And you can tweet him at Will_Bunch. Just one of the great writers and reporters of our day. We'll be back, and be sure to check out his book on Reagan. It's spectacular. We'll be back. And welcome back. Oh, let's see here. Corky in Rochester, New York. Hey, Corky, thanks for calling. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Hello, Tom. How are you?
I am great, but I'll get better, Corky. Hope the same is true for you.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the Trump supporters have had enough yet to prove that this is a crime family.
Well, what we're seeing is that the Republican Party is shrinking. And as a result of that, the number of people who identify themselves as Republicans in polls is actually shrinking. And it's shrinking down to basically the core of people who only watch Fox News. And I'm convinced that that is the secret sauce here that nobody wants to talk about out loud in the media, is that it's Fox News viewers exclusively who are Donald Trump's base, and that's why they're immune to the truth, because Fox News doesn't talk about the things that everybody else is talking about. Fox News doesn't talk about the crimes that Donald Trump has committed, or the incompetence of Donald Trump, or the possibility of collusion between Trump, or at least his sons, and Russian efforts to release Hillary Clinton's documents and whatnot. I mean, it's like, these things are not discussed on Fox News. Fox News is such a separate universe that when Trump stepped onto Air Force One last week, or maybe it was a little farther back than a week, but it's just being reported this week, he walked onto Air Force One and noticed he's got a bedroom and Melania has a bedroom. They sleep separately. Apparently they live separately, and by and large. And he noticed that in Melania's bedroom, the TV was tuned to CNN. In his bedroom, it was tuned to Fox News. And he went nuts and yelling and screaming obscenities and just, freaking out at the people on Air Force One that CNN was on and his wife might see it. And I think that's because, CNN is telling the truth about what's going on. And Trump, I mean, literally a couple days ago in one of his rallies said, don't pay attention to what's going on. That's all fake news, which is like right out of the dictator's handbook. So, Corky, I think that the Trump voters, many people who voted for Trump have had enough, and they're fleeing the party. But what's happening is that the party has shrunk down to this small, maybe 20 million people, or maybe 20% of the American voting electorate, which is probably in the neighborhood of 30 million people, who are watching Fox News, and that's it. So I don't, those people haven't had enough because their channels of information are poisoned.
Shows.
Pardon?
That we need paper ballots.
Yeah. It
also
shows that we need, we need to figure out a way to deprogram people who have joined this Jim Jones cult of Donald Trump, via Fox News. I mean, Fox News has created a cult among its viewers. And the question in my mind, and I don't have an answer for this, Corky, but the question in my mind, Jen, what's her name, did this marvelous movie, The Brainwashing of My Dad. And the question in my mind is, outside of individual efforts, I mean, she actually had to turn the TV off and let her dad watch CNN once in a while, and suddenly he realized, oh my God, I've been lied to. But how do you break through that? How do you change that at a systemic level, at a national level? I don't know the answer. Corky, you got a suggestion?
Like you're reporting, you get these guys to flip, and they got tapes.
Yeah, so you're saying eventually the evidence is so overwhelming that even Fox News has to acknowledge it. Well, I hope you're right, Corky. I hope you're right. We'll be back. It's 22 and a half minutes past the hour. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair chair, office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at thomsbeats.com, thomsbeets.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Thom, Thom. Welcome back. Some just remarkable stuff in the news here, and I've got some really substantial rants for you for this hour, for the second hour, and for the third hour. In our second hour, I want to talk about Trump and Medicaid and what's going on in Maine. In our third hour, I want to talk about Elizabeth Warren and taxes. Just some amazing events happening that we'll get to. But right now, I want to talk about Donald Trump and why. Just how breathtakingly incompetent he is. I have a piece up on Alternate right now, alternate.org, about it. The headline is, Trump doesn't have the skill to pull off his most nefarious plots. And the storyline of this basically is that Donald Trump, we've been thinking of Trump and talking about Trump up to this point as if he's Lex Luthor, or as if he's the Riddler, some sort of brilliant anti-hero, some sort of brilliant evil bad guy. But it turns out he's a bumbling evil bad guy. He's not brilliant at all. He's an incompetent evil bad guy. For example, Michael Isikoff is reporting over at yahoo.com News that President Trump's former Homeland Security advisor, his name is Rob Joyce, has been fired by John Bolton. This is the guy who is in charge of U.S. cyber policy. In other words, protecting our electric grid from invasions of hostile countries, or protecting our water supplies, or our septic systems, or anything. I mean, somebody can come in on cyber, and they have determined now that, in fact, in this case, it was the Russians. I'm sure the Chinese have done it as well, and probably the other countries that are famous for their hacking skills, North Korea, Israel, possibly Saudi Arabia. Looking at the inside of our critical infrastructure, and gee, we discover that it is possible to hack into the electric grid and shut down the city of Chicago, or maybe shut down the Indian Point nuclear reactor and shut down New York. But there was a guy who was in charge of making sure that didn't happen. His name was Rob Joyce, and Donald and Bolton fired him, and nobody's replaced him. We have no cybersecurity czar, as it were. We've got nobody looking at this stuff. Meanwhile, this headline, this is hysterical. This is over at businessinsider.com, but it's another testimonial to Trump's incompetence. The headline, Chinese-made Trump flags and hats are reportedly held up at customs. Trump-themed flags and hats made in China are purportedly being held up at U.S. Customs amid an intensifying trade war. Yes, Trump put a tariff on his own hats and flags. Textile suppliers who export their goods to the U.S. told China's state-run tabloid Global Times their products have been delayed at U.S. Customs, which is affecting their sales. So the Trump flags are made in China. The Trump hats are made in China. And Trump is telling us we've got to stop companies from shipping our jobs to China. Really? I mean, he can't even do trade. He can't even do demagoguery right.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll continue with this and a little bit more right after the break, and then pick up your phone calls here for Anything Goes Summer. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Notes on Debates in the Federal Convention of 1787, reported by James Madison. That would be the Constitutional Convention where everybody got together and wrote the Constitution. This is from Wednesday, August 22nd. Article 7, Section 4, resumed. Mr. Sherman was, and this is Madison's notes, so he's reporting what Mr. Sherman said. Mr. Sherman was for leaving the clause as it stands. He disapproved of the slave trade. Yet as the states were now possessed of the right to import slaves, as the public good did not require it to be taken from them, and as it was expedient to have as few objections as possible to the proposed scheme of government. The proposal, by the way, was to ban the importation of slaves after 1808 with the assumption that the states would rapidly end slavery shortly thereafter. And you'll hear that in just a minute. It was expedient to have as few objections as possible to the proposed scheme of government. He thought it best to leave the matter as we find it. He observed that the abolition of slavery seemed to be going on in the U.S. and that the good sense of the several states would probably by degrees complete it soon. He urged on the convention the necessity of dispatching its business. Colonel Mason spoke. This infernal traffic originated in the avarice of British nations. The British government constantly checked the attempts of Virginia to put a stop to it. The present question concerns not the importing of slaves alone, but the whole Union. The evil of having slaves was experienced during the late war. Had slaves been treated as they might have been by the enemy, they would have proved dangerous instruments in their hands. What he's talking about is the British offering slaves freedom if they came and fought for the British. But their folly dealt by the slaves as it did by the Tories. He mentioned the dangerous insurrections of the slaves in Greece and Sicily and the instructions given to by Cromwell to the commissioners sent to Virginia to arm the servants and slaves in case other means of obtaining its submission should fail. Maryland and Virginia he said, had already prohibited the importation of slaves expressly. North Carolina had done the same in substance. All this would be in vain if South Carolina and Georgia were at liberty to import. The Western people are already calling out for slaves for their new lands and will fill that country with slaves if they can be got through South Carolina and Georgia. Slavery discourages arts and manufactures. The poor despise labor when performed by slaves. They prevent the immigration of whites. They produce the most pernicious effect on manners. Every master of slaves is born a petty tyrant. They bring the judgment of heaven on a country. As nations cannot be rewarded or punished in the next world, they must be in this. By an inevitable chain of causes and effects, providence punishes national sins by national calamities. He lamented that some of our Eastern brethren had, from a lust of gain, embarked in this nefarious traffic. As to the states being in possession of the right to import, this was the case with many other rights now to be properly given up. He held it essential in every point of view that when the general government should have the power to the general government should have the power to prevent the increase of slavery. Mr. Ellsworth rose to spoke. As he had never owned a slave, could not judge on the effects of slavery on character. He said, however, that if it was to be considered in a moral light, we ought to go farther and free those already in our country. As slaves also multiply so fast in Virginia and Maryland that it is cheaper to raise than import them, whilst in the sickly rice swamps foreign supplies are necessary, if we go no further than is urged, we shall be unjust toward South Carolina and Georgia. Let us not intermeddle. As population increases, poor laborers will be so plenty as to render slaves useless. Slavery in time will not be a speck in our country. Provision is already made in Connecticut for abolishing it, and the abolition has already taken place in Massachusetts. As to the danger of insurrections from foreign influence, that will become a motive to kind treatment of the slaves and former slaves. Mr. Pinckney, if slavery be wrong, it is justified by the example of all the world. He cited the case of Greece, Rome, and other ancient states, the sanction given by France, England, Holland, and other modern states. In all ages, one half of mankind had been slaves. If the southern states were let alone, they would probably of themselves stop importations. He would himself, as a citizen of South Carolina, vote for it. An attempt to take away the right as proposed will produce serious objections to the Constitution, which he wished to see adopted. General Pinckney rose to speak and declared it to be his firm opinion that if himself and all his colleagues were to sign the Constitution and use their personal influence, it would be of no avail towards obtaining the assent of their constituents. South Carolina and Georgia cannot do without slaves. As to Virginia, she will gain by stopping the importation. Her slaves will rise in value, and she has more than she wants. It would be unequal to require South Carolina and Georgia to confederate on such unequal terms. He said the royal assent before the Revolution had never been refused to South Carolina, as to Virginia. He contended that the importation of slaves would be for the interest of the whole Union. The more slaves, the more produce to employ the carrying trade, the more consumption also, and the more of this, the more of revenue for the common treasury. He admitted it to be reasonable that slaves should be dutied like other imports, but should consider a rejection of the clause as an exclusion of South Carolina from the Union. Mr. Baldwin rose to speak, said he had conceived national objects alone to be before the convention, not such as like the present were of a local nature. Georgia was decided on this point. That state was always hitherto supposed a general government, and on it goes. It's a fascinating insight into what these guys were thinking and debating.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Some genuinely bizarre goings on in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump gets on Air Force One. There's a piece about this in today's, I believe it's the Washington Post. It might be the New York Times. I read both of them throughout the day, and but in any case, it's probably on both. And what they're, in fact, actually, I can just check while we're talking and tell you, it's in the New York Times. And in fact, it's titled "A Stir on Air Force One as a Television is Tuned to CNN." So he gets on Air Force One, and he and Melania have they kind of lead separate lives. They have separate bedrooms, separate living quarters in the White House and in Trump Tower, and apparently separate bedrooms on Air Force One. And he sees that her TV is tuned to CNN while his is tuned to Fox News, and he goes just bat guano crazy. I mean, he just starts yelling and screaming obscenities at people. Obviously, he's very frightened that the First Lady, that Melania, might be exposed to reality, to what's really going on, and orders them never to have any of these TVs on anything except Fox News. He has to live inside his bubble. Meanwhile, inside his bubble, Michael Cohen, who used to be part of his bubble, is kind of cracking. And last night, Rachel Maddow played this clip on her show, and Louise and I were sitting there listening to it, watching the show, listening to it. And as she played it, I swear to God, I heard Trump say, "We just have to wait for another 3 weeks." Or maybe 3 months. I swear I heard that. I thought I heard that. And then Rachel on her program had, or maybe it was Lawrence right after. We watched a little bit of Lawrence before we went to bed. But one of them had Adam Schiff on and said, "Well, what did you think about the tape?" And Adam Schiff said, "Well, when he said that he was going to, all he needed was to delay for a couple of months." Now, keep in mind, this conversation happened 2 months before the election, so it would have made sense that he was saying we only had to delay it for 2 or 3 months rather than 2 or 3 weeks, which is what I thought I heard. But he heard it too. And I'm saying to Louise, see, I'm not crazy, because everybody was ignoring it. And I thought that was like the most important part of the tape. That's actual evidence of a conspiracy to conceal information from the American people that can affect the U.S. election by paying off a woman that Trump had a year-long sexual affair with right after his son was born. But now I've got the podcast from Rachel's show last night, and I play this, and I only hear a little tiny bit of that. And I'm going to play it for you, and you can hear this. And her podcast is all over the place now, iTunes and whatnot. But this is from the tape, and it comports with the one that CNN has put out. But it sounds to me like there's an edit. It sounds to me like right after Donald Trump says we only have to wait a couple of like that, it sounds to me like there's actually a clumsy edit on this tape. But you decide. Here it is. This is Donald Trump talking to Michael Cohen. This is in the context of the Ivanka thing, where the New York Times has subpoenaed them about Ivanka. They want to release the divorce records, and in those divorce pleadings, according to at least one book, Ivanka had said that Donald beat her up and raped her. And she's since walked that back. But now the New York Times was digging into this 2 months before the election. Here's the conversation.
2-3 weeks now.
All you have to do is delay it for...
Even after that, it's not going to ever be...
You hear that? All we have to do is delay it for... And, you know, in fact, maybe I can just play this again, just a little bit of it.
That served from the New York Times. I told you this regarding to unseal the divorce papers with Ivana.
Ivana, his first wife.
Kaslowitz is going to
never be able to get that done.
Never. Kaslowitz doesn't. They'll ever be able. They don't have a.
Give me a code, please.
There must be something terrible in those divorce papers.
A woman that doesn't want to unseal.
Correct.
So you've been handling.
Yes, and it's all.
It's been going on for a while.
For about 2-3 weeks now.
All you have to do is delay it for.
Even after
You
that,
hear
it's
that?
not going to ever be.
All you have to do is delay it for... You know, either he stopped himself, which is unlikely, or somebody edited that tape. And I think that's where the actual evidence of criminal conspiracy is, right there in that cut. I'd like to know what the hell is going on. Meanwhile, a federal judge just said that Trump, this was today, just hours ago, in fact, it's breaking news over in the Washington Post. There is a lawsuit by the Attorneys General of Maryland and D.C. against Donald Trump for continuing to own the Trump Hotel in D.C. And the piece that I wrote for Alternate, you can find it today, about his breathtaking incompetence. I point out that he's probably keeping that property because he desperately needs the money. His daughter, Ivanka, reported $4 million in income from the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C., and her daddy owns a much bigger share of it. I'm telling you, this guy is broke and up to his eyeballs in debt to oligarchs around the world, including some major Russian oligarchs. And that's why he's behaving the way he is. And that's why he's holding on to this hotel. He needs the money. But now this federal judge says that this lawsuit by the Attorneys General of Maryland and D.C. can go forward, and they can actually begin discovery. They can begin interviewing people from the Trump Organization about what foreigners are staying at the Trump Hotel and how much they're spending, which may put a crimp on foreign governments telling their people go stay in the Trump Hotel to make the president happy. I doubt it will immediately, but if they start digging out some dirt and start publicizing these governments, it's gonna have some substantial impact. So anyhow, enough of my rants. I've got a whole bunch more for the second and third hour today, some fairly long and involved rants, in fact, that I think you're going to have a lot of fun with. But let's get to your calls. John in Portland, listening on X-Ray FM. Hey, John, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Love the show. And my big issue is I'm ex-Catholic, raised Catholic grade school. And this is no bigotry or hate against Catholics all over the world. But I believe in the First Amendment. And I also believe that we as ex-Catholics, cafeteria Catholics, practicing Catholics, whatever, if we care about women's rights, and Ireland passed by referendum democratically to finally give women the right to control their own bodies and to get an abortion if they need it, and birth control. We need to assert ourselves, and I recommend calling the archdiocese, your archdiocese, and tell the conduit to Rome, the Vatican, that if they pursue supporting a right-wing Catholic Opus Dei Supreme Court judge from the Federalist Society, that's where they get these folks, is the way I understand it. Right. And just tell them, hey, with all your pedophilia protection patriarchal programs and now this, we are going to do a mass excommunication if we have to.
Okay, well, good luck with that, John. I don't, and thanks for the call. I don't see calling the archdiocese as having much impact. They typically try to stay out of American politics, although that was, that has not been the case on a number of occasions. But I think calling your U.S. senator, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, and saying Brett Kavanaugh, this guy that Trump has appointed, number one, is pretty much the only judge in America who has taken the position in writing that a president should not be interrogated about criminal acts he might have committed, that a president should be immune from prosecution for criminal acts he may have committed, that a president shouldn't even have to bother talking to people about criminal acts he may have committed. And that's obviously why Donald Trump picked him out of the group that the Federalist Society gave him. Everybody in that group, of course, was in favor of overturning a woman's right to choose to have an abortion. And this is this is pretty grim stuff. Jared in Downington, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, what's up?
Hello, Tom. I am just in utter shock at just all of this horrible news that happened last week. It seems like every week seems to get worse and worse and under the regime. And I want you to start calling it the regime. That something I learned from Rush Limbaugh is that we should not be calling this a legitimate government. It is the regime in power. I would even go so far as to call it a foreign occupation for the most part. I think there is a conspiracy going on with the alt-right and international alt-right to take over the planet that I've been talking about.
Yeah.
And it goes far beyond Russia. It goes.
It's not even a conspiracy, Jared. I mean, Steve Bannon is over in Europe right now, openly talking about his plans to inflame the alt-right in country after country, and essentially take apart NATO and the European Union.
Exactly, and you see it in places like Israel, with their new apartheid regime law there.
Yeah.
It is not a democracy at all. You see that.
Well, it is a democracy, but it's a democracy with racial and religious segregation, and that segregation is literally segregation in the classic sense of the word. That is to say, one group of people have one set of rights, and another group of people have a very different set of rights, which are subordinate to the first groups. In this case, it's Jews and Arabs, but in the United States, it was whites and blacks.
Exactly.
Or in South Africa, it was whites and blacks too. Which is where the word apartheid came from.
Separate but equal, so to speak.
But it's not even equal. It wasn't equal in South Africa. It's not equal in Israel. Tragically, I think this is a big mistake. But I'm not Israeli, and I don't do Israeli politics, so it's just I've been looking at it from the outside. It's like, whoa. But you're concerned about war with Iran, right?
Exactly. I'm really concerned about war with Iran because I have a loved one in that region myself. And I seriously believe that Trump is going to do a war with Iran in order to prevent impeachment.
Yeah.
And
I agree with you, Jared. And in fact, the thing that causes me to agree with you is that in 2011, Donald Trump tweeted that Barack Obama would start a war with Iran to help him get reelected in 2012. And which means that Donald Trump has been thinking about war with Iran as an electoral strategy since at least 2011. That's scary stuff. Thank you, Jared.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Oh, let's see here. Don, watching Free Speech TV in Seattle. Hey, Don, what's on your mind?
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Tom.
Sure.
Yeah, when you talk about Trump being disorganized, well, no wonder his first name is Donald, as in Mafia Don. But we know, of course, crime is organized, but Trump's the head of a disorganized crime. So.
Yeah.
And I think his ineptitude might possibly be his undoing. So
I think so too. It's he lurches from crisis to crisis. He has done this his entire life. It has not served him well in business. If he had simply taken the $100 or $200 million that he inherited upon his father's death and put it into the stock market, into just a Dow fund, just spread it across the I think it's 30 stocks in the Dow Jones Industrials. If he had simply put it into the Dow, it would be worth over $10 billion today. And all reasonable estimates done by Fortune magazine, done by Forbes, done by David K. Johnston. There's a number of people who have analyzed what there is publicly available about his finances, including the stuff that he's required by law to file, running for and being president. And everybody has concluded that his net worth is probably in the neighborhood. If he is worth $1 billion, he's only worth slightly more than $1 billion, but in all odds, his actual net worth is well under $1 billion and might even be under zero. He might even be in debt. And if that's the case, then, you know, he's an incompetent businessman. If he had simply put his daddy's money in the Dow, he'd be worth $10 billion right now. But instead, he's pissed it away, you know, at least $9 billion of it. And forgive the phrase, it's probably not an appropriate word to use on TV, but it certainly describes, I think, what he's done. He's incompetent. He's incompetent even at the stuff he thinks he's competent at.
I know. I think he's also in debt to Deutsche Bank for a huge sum of money that's involved in international money laundering schemes.
And there's some question about whether Anthony Kennedy's son, who worked at Deutsche Bank back at the time that it was loaning money to Donald Trump, had anything to do with that. And I've not seen a definitive article about that. Deutsche Bank is holding their cards close to their chest. Obviously, Anthony Kennedy's son and Donald Trump are not talking about it. But there's some speculation that I take very seriously, as in, not that I necessarily believe, but I think we need to follow, that Kennedy's son was part of, maybe a small part, but part of an orchestrated campaign to get Anthony Kennedy to resign right now, so that they can get another hard right judge on the court, so that they can execute their agenda in time for, the 2020 election. And it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. Anyway, do we have time briefly to discuss the break-in to the DNC?
We have 26 seconds.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of Watergate, and the break-in to the files to get dirt on Ted Kennedy, especially concerning Chappaquiddick and Daniel Ellsberg, to discredit him in his book. And it just looks like the same deal to me, just in a different form of it,
Yeah. So. Just done electronically by a foreign power rather than done domestically by guys who used to work, for the mafia. Bernard Barker, actually, he was a hitman or a criminal for Sandro Trafficante and Carlos Marcello, and then he went to work for the CIA, for E. Howard Hunt, and then he went to work for Richard Nixon. And anyhow, Don, thanks for the call. Excellent points all. We'll be back. It's 49 minutes and change past the hour. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at thomsbeats.com, thomsbeets.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I've been talking about how Trump doesn't have the skill to pull off his most nefarious plots. Actually, I'll get to this stuff after the top of the hour. We've got a whole bunch of things to talk about. And Nate in Eugene, Oregon. Hey, Nate, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Hey, I love you. I wish I could talk to you for hours, but I just wanted to give you a quick, you were talking a few minutes ago about that Trump and Cohen tape, and you thought there might have been an edit when you heard that hiss.
Right. I haven't had an opportunity to open it in Adobe Audition. In fact, I was trying to record it into Audition this morning, and apparently my computer needs to be reconfigured. So have you done that?
No, I haven't. My internet went out for no reason the other day. I'm waiting on the repair person.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my suggestion. Was just to look at it.
That was your suggestion, yeah. Because I want to look at the waveform. Yeah, because that an analysis of that will give you at least some much stronger clues than what I'm just hearing, if it was edited or not. But thanks for the suggestion, Nate. It's a very good one, and I totally agree with you. Jack in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Jack. Thanks for listening to Chicago's Progressive Talk. What's up?
Hi, it's Jackman, by the way.
Oh, Jack. Okay.
Anyway, my concern is a report I read the other day that because America is becoming population-centered in 5 very large states, that within a decade, 70% of Congress is going to be controlled by 30% of the population.
Right.
And we're seeing this in legislation. If 70% of the population was controlling Congress, we would have gun control.
That's right.
We would have mass transit.
And we'd have national health care, and we would have free college education if 70% of the population controlled 70% of Congress. But right now, I don't think that's what's coming. That's where we're at right now. You've got in the Senate, the Republican senators represent a little over 30% of the American population. In the House of Representatives, the Republicans represent a little over 45% of the U.S. population, and in the White House you've got Donald Trump, who lost by 3 million votes. So look at where we're at right now. So yeah, Jack, this is the problem, because the Republicans, it's not that the Republicans are reflecting the will of a large slice of the American electorate. They're put there by a large slice of the American electorate, but the will that they're actually reflecting, the goals and ideals, the mission statements, are those of the billionaires who are funding their campaigns, including the deceptions and weird positions that they take in order to attract those 30%. So I'm with you, Jack. Well said. Tony in Watsonville, California. Hey, Tony, what's up?
Yeah, good morning, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Yeah, I was calling about the Cohen tape.
Yeah.
I heard it last night on the corporate news, and it sounded like he was talking about his ex-wife's thing, not about the.
Yeah, this was in the context. This was in the context of the New York Times getting access to the divorce records with Ivana, his first wife, in which it has been alleged in at least one book that she claimed that he raped her after she gave him the name of a doctor who could do hair surgery, and Donald got the surgery and didn't like the results, and he beat her up and raped her. And she has walked that back and said, no, that didn't happen, although it did exist in print and was reported. And he has sued one of the book publishers. So, whether it happened or not, and whether that's what they were trying to cover up or not, I don't know. And I'm not asserting one way or the other. But if what he was saying is we only need a few more weeks to, we need to keep this out of the press for a few more weeks, then, it wasn't about the Playboy model he had the year-long affair with. It wasn't about the adult entertainer, Stormy Daniels, Karen McDougal being the Playboy bunny. It wasn't about Stormy Daniels. It was about the Ivana divorce. But that still is the place where he's saying, hey, wait a minute, we've got to keep this out of the public eye. Robin in Kingston, Washington. Hey, Robin, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. You had asked Corky a while ago whether or not he had any answers on how to deal with this block of Republicans whom I call ditto heads.
Who get all their news from Fox News exclusively, and so they don't believe what's actually being told the American people by real journalists. Yes.
Yes, the ditto heads ignore all of that, and the answer is actually very simple, and it stands up a little bit against some of the things that you stand for on the show, and okay. I'll just mention those.
We only have 50 seconds, so cut to the chase, please.
Okay, and so the cutting to the chase is ignore them, and spend your time and your energy finding and having discussions with people who are able to be moved by evidence and thoughtfulness and facts.
Yeah, you're right.
If the left does that, Tom, within a month everything will change. Instead of wasting our time arguing against the incontrovertible and being frustrated at that, we will find out how many wonderful people are around here who we can have great conversations with, and we can actually help change.
And make sure that they're registered. Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and I completely agree with it. And Robin, I completely agree with you that we need to focus on turning out the vote. We need to focus on informing people. You know, Jefferson said you can't have a democracy without an educated and informed electorate. And the Republicans are doing everything they can to make sure that people don't have access to education, even primary school, you know, this whole privatization effort, number one. And number two, they're trying to poison the channels of public information, to quote Henry Wallace, and, you know, about what a fascist does. I'm with you, Robin. We need to reach out to our allies and our friends and families. Thank you. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at thomsbeats.com, thomsbeets.com, or by calling 800-568-9889.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Thom, Thom. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Legacy of Secrecy, The Long Shadow of the JFK Assassination by Lamar Waldron and me. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963, triggered cover-ups by officials, this is from the introduction, by the way, that continue to negatively impact American politics, life, and foreign policy. Legacy of Secrecy details those cover-ups and hidden investigations, many for the first time, including the reasons they were carried out under such intense secrecy. Most were spawned by John and Robert Kennedy's top-secret 1963 plan to stage a coup against Fidel Castro, a plan so highly classified that it only started to be exposed in 2005 and is finally revealed in this book. Their own confessions now show that three mafia bosses, Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante, and Johnny Roselli, were behind JFK's assassination. They used parts of the secret coup plan to kill JFK in a way that forced Attorney General Robert Kennedy, President Lyndon B. Johnson, excuse me, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, and high CIA official Richard Helms to withhold critical information not only from the public and the press, but also from each other and sometimes their own investigators. It's important to keep in mind that JFK was murdered just a year after the tense nuclear standoff during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The main goals of U.S. officials were to prevent a nuclear confrontation with the Soviets and to protect JFK's ally high up in the Cuban government, Commander Juan Almeida, head of the Cuban Army in 1963, still listed as Cuba's #3 official today. While U.S. leaders have managed to prevent a confrontation with Russia and preserve a critical ally in the Cuban government, this limited the investigation into JFK's murder, allowing the three mafia chiefs and their associates to remain free. As a result, the long shadow of secrecy surrounding both JFK's murder and the coup plan set the stage for the murder of Martin Luther King, ultimately driving two presidents from office and bringing about the murders of 5 congressional witnesses in the mid-1970s. Legacy of secrecy breaks excuse me, important new ground in key areas, detailing for the first time Louisiana godfather Carlos Marcello's clear confession to ordering JFK's assassination. Marcello's criminal empire ranged from Dallas to Memphis, and previously secret files at the National Archives have shown that he made this confession in 1985 to an FBI informant ruled credible by a federal judge as part of a secret FBI undercover sting operation named Camtex. Exposed here for the first time, Camtex yielded Marcello's admission that he'd met Lee Harvey Oswald and set Jack Ruby up in business in Dallas. The operation also generated hundreds of hours of heretofore secret prison audio tapes of Marcello discussing his crimes, recorded using the FBI informant's bugged transistor radio. Yet the FBI and Justice Department withheld most of that information from the public and Congress for years until its revelation in this book. Carlos Marcello wasn't the only mob boss who confessed his involvement in JFK's murder to a trusted associate. Legacy also uncovers important new information about Marcello's partners in JFK's assassination, Tampa godfather Santos Trafficante and Johnny Roselli, the Chicago Mafia's man in Las Vegas and Hollywood. Shortly before their deaths, both mobsters admitted their roles in JFK's murder to their attorneys. Two of their associates with documented ties to the secret JFK Almaheda coup plan likewise confessed. Using exclusive new information supported by FBI files apparently withheld from Congress, this book names two of the Georgia men who paid James Earl Ray to kill the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, white supremacist Joseph Miltier and Hugh R. Spake. Miltier, who had been involved in Marcello's murder of JFK, was part of a small clique of racists in Atlanta who used Marcello to broker the contract to murder Dr. King. We document James Earl Ray's ties to Marcello's heroin smuggling operation and long overlooked evidence in FBI files linking Ray to Marcello's associate, Johnny Roselli. Finally, this book explains why Ray, while fleeing to Canada the day after killing Dr. King in Memphis, made a 400-plus mile detour south to Atlanta, where he contacted Spake to get help from Miltier. In 1979, the last congressional committee to investigate the murders of JFK and Dr. King, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, concluded, quote, that Trafficante, like Marcello, had the motive, means, and opportunity to assassinate President Kennedy, end of quote from the congressional report. The HSCA had been created in the wake of Roselli's sensational murder, but the HSCA was unable to establish direct evidence of Marcello's complicity. And the same was true for Trafficante and Roselli, because the CIA, FBI, and other federal agencies withheld so many relevant files. The HSCA, headed by civil rights figure Louis Stokes, also concluded there was a likelihood of conspiracy in the assassination of Dr. King and that financial gain was James Earl Ray's primary motivation. But they were unable to determine who had paid Ray or how the conspiracy had worked because the FBI and other agencies had hid critical files. With the help of more than 24 associates of John and Robert Kennedy, backed up by thousands of recently released documents at the National Archives, many of which are quoted here for the first time, Legacy tells the full story denied to Congress and the American people, Legacy of Secrecy.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Falling over the street is different from falling. The book.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Stephen Colbert wins the award for the best line of the night last night. He said, U.S. farmers are getting the Stormy Daniels treatment by Donald Trump. First he screws them, then he pays them off. Yep. Boom. Okay, so that's happening. In Helsinki, we had this meeting with this press conference with Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, in which a reporter stood up and asked President Putin, did you want Donald Trump to be elected, and did you direct your senior staff, or your people, I forget the phrase he used, to help with that election? And President Putin says, yes, I did. Yes, I did. We wanted Donald Trump to be president because he would improve U.S.-Russian relations. That part, and I'm paraphrasing from memory here, so I may be a word or two off, but essentially that's what happened. That little piece has been completely removed from the Russian online versions and has been shrunk down dramatically in the White House online versions. Yet it still lives in all the news sites, but the White House and the Kremlin are both saying, apparently we didn't say that. Very strange stuff. Very strange stuff. I just, I share that with you without comment. It's going to be interesting to see where this goes. But what I wanted to talk about this hour was healthcare. We had a caller in the last hour who said, right now the Republicans represent a little more than 30% of the American electorate, even though they control the White House, the House, and the Senate, and the Supreme Court. And that is true, and that's largely because states with very, very small populations like Wyoming and Oklahoma and whatnot get 2 senators. And states with very large populations like California and New York get 2 senators. So you've got a little over 30% of the population is represented by the Republicans in the Senate, yet they control the Senate. And, a little over 40% of the American population is represented by Republicans in the House of Representatives, yet they control the House of Representatives. And in many states, like in Pennsylvania, you get more votes for Democrats, and yet they send, 11 or 13 Republicans to the House and only 4 or 5, as I recall, Democrats. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but it's in that neighborhood. And this is happening all across the country. So neither the House nor the Senate actually represents the will of the American people. And certainly the White House doesn't. Trump lost by 3 million votes. And the Supreme Court doesn't, because if the Supreme Court hadn't put George Bush on the bench in 2000, or in the White House on 2000, and if the Russians hadn't helped out Trump, and the billionaires hadn't helped out Trump, and voter suppression hadn't helped out Trump, and possibly voter election hacking hadn't helped out Trump in 2016, he wouldn't be in the White House either. So you wouldn't have all these hardcore right wing. I believe they're all Catholic now so far as well, which from Trump's point of view is if you put a Catholic on there, it's a reliable anti-abortion vote. In fact, I don't think there's a single Protestant on the court anymore. It's you got several Jews and everybody else is Catholic. So, which is not an anti-Catholic rant at all, it's at all. But sort of negates what comes before it, right? Well, maybe what I'm saying is that I think that they're cherry picking fervently anti-abortion Catholics, because there's a lot of Catholics who are pro-choice. But healthcare continues to be actually the thing that Americans are the most concerned about. There's a national poll, 57% of people over 45 years old, that's their number one issue is healthcare. 54% of people who live in rural areas. Now these are typically Fox News watching Republican voting people. And yet 54% of them say that healthcare is the number one issue for them as we go into this election. 53% of all women across the United States. We're still well over half. 52% of non-college educated whites. The so-called Trump base, or at least a small slice of them are the small so-called Trump base. So here we have, healthcare is like the issue. In fact, when asked across the board, just all Americans, when asked, should government do something to make healthcare more affordable, 78% say yes. Which leads me to this befuddling story. This is from the New York Times, Abby Goodnow writing, the headline of Vote Expanded Medicaid in Maine, the governor is ignoring it. The Republican governor of Maine, Paul LePage. It starts out, Brandy is telling the story of this 39-year-old breast cancer survivor named Brandy Staples. And Brandy had expected that last month, when Maine voters approved a ballot referendum to expand Medicaid so that people like Brandy could get health care. Now keep in mind, Paul LePage, 5 times the legislature passed an expansion of Medicaid, and 5 times Paul LePage vetoed it. So it went to the people, and the people voted for it, and so it is now law according to the Constitution of Maine. And yet, to read from Abby Goodnow's piece in today's New York Times, yesterday's New York Times, ignoring the binding vote, Governor Paul LePage has refused to expand the program, blasting it as a needless, budget-busting form of welfare. He vetoed 5 expansion bills before the issue made the ballot, plus a spending bill this month that provided about $60 million in funding for the first year. Earlier this month, he went so far as to say he would go to jail before I put my state in red ink, by adding at least 70,000 more low-income adults to the state's Medicaid population of 264,000. Paul LePage is fighting like hell to keep 70,000 Mainers from getting health care. In what universe is this a reasonable position? You've got Fox News doing pieces on TV about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I've got to write her name down on my computer here until I have it memorized. She's so new to politics, and it's an unusual name. But in any way, you got Fox News doing segments about, oh my God, she's calling for health care and education for everybody in America. Can you believe this? And, you know, of course, the billionaires who are watching are going, oh my God, that can't be. But the average Fox News watcher, they're going to have to stop doing this because these people are going to start voting Democratic. And if nothing else has opened the eyes of people in Maine, this has to be it. At the same time, the Democratic candidates for president are getting on board. They're figuring this out, that America actually wants, quote, free health care. And yes, we realize you're going to have to raise the taxes of billionaires and corporations to pay for it. Kirsten Gillibrand, who was the Clintons' best friend. She was, you know, Bill Clinton wrote or Hillary, one or the other, wrote the foreword to her book, who was confronted by Stephen Colbert several years ago on television about all the money that she was taking from the banks. You know, she had raised over $5 million from business PACs, and in 2013, it was John Oliver on The Daily Show, he pointed out that she took millions of dollars from Goldman Sachs, or lots of money from Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan Chase and Company, and said, what's required of you for that money? Because it makes me uncomfortable. And Senator Gillibrand, of course, was also uncomfortable by that. Now, she has come out and said, I'm no longer taking money from corporate PACs, period. And by the way, we should put a tax on the stock market on financial transactions to pay for single-payer health care. She was also labeled the Me Too Senator. This has been one of her big issues throughout her career and throughout her life, apparently, is fighting for the rights of women, particularly against the predation of men, which is a fine, you know, I totally salute that. Although I think she went a little overboard when she called on Al Franken to resign. But she's always trying to be, you know, pushing the borders, pushing the limits. You know, I think that was a fundamental mistake, and it's going to haunt her badly. But, you know, maybe people will forget. And, you know, but now she was the first Democrat in the Senate to endorse a federal jobs guarantee. She was the first senator to introduce legislation, this is what Bernie campaigned on, that every post office in America should offer retail banking services to low-income people to kill the payday loan industry. She has embraced legalizing marijuana nationwide. She wants to tax the drug companies because, you know, to essentially, you know, force them to roll back their drug prices. She's backed the Wall Street tax, and she said, you know, no more corporate PACs. This woman, she went from an A rating with the NRA when she was Bill Clinton's acolyte to an F rating now with the NRA because she's saying, I'm in favor of gun control. She says now her economic platform has roots in Franklin Roosevelt's Second Bill of Rights and Martin Luther King's call for full employment. Now, there are some people who are saying, oh, geez, you know, as the political winds shift, so does she. I say that's great. That's exactly what you want in a politician. You want a politician who can look at the electorate, listen to what they're saying, get a sense of the needs of the American people, and then campaign to fill those needs, to meet those needs, to do what Americans are asking for. Now, it does get problematic when you have a politician. I mean, Bill Clinton, go back and read, just Google Bill Clinton's New Covenant speech in 1992. It was his stump speech. I reprinted a large chunk of it in my book, Threshold. If you have a copy kicking around, you can read it yourself. But it should be online. It should be easy to Google. And in that New Covenant speech, Bill Clinton campaigned in 1992 for president as an FDR Democrat. But he did not govern as such. He governed as a Al Fromm, you know, DLC third way, quote, centrist, I would say corporatist. And, you know, so we got kind of kicked in the groin around that one. And Obama only had 72 business days out of his entire 8 years where he controlled the House and Senate, and he passed some really good stuff, particularly Obamacare, which was his focus, his legacy. But the rest of those days, the Republicans controlled the Senate, so we really don't know what kind of a president Obama would have been if he'd actually had a Congress that could go along with, doing the things that he was talking about. I have a feeling he would have been a pretty good president. As it was, there were compromises and that were necessary because the Republicans controlled the show. But so, I don't want to be fooled again like we were with Bill Clinton. But on the other hand, I don't want to say that a politician who changes their minds on issues is a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. I think it's fundamentally a good thing. And Clinton didn't go from being, a middle of the roader to being a progressive on the campaign and then back to being a middle of the road. Well, I believe he'd been pretty progressive as the governor of Arkansas. But I'm not an authority on Bill Clinton. I mean, I'd have to look it up. So, but this just confounds me that the Republicans think it's a winning issue, and Paul LePage must think that this is politically going to work to his benefit. To say to working Americans, and 100% of the people who will be covered by Medicaid expansion are people who are working. The people who aren't working, they're already on Medicaid. This is for people who are making more than $2,000 a year and less than $16,000 a year. The working poor.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
How Paul LePage can think that kicking the working poor in the teeth and then saying, no, I'm not even going to pay for the guy to clean up the blood. How can he say that's a good policy? And welcome back. Michael in Imperial Beach, California, watching on Free Speech TV. Hey, Michael, your thoughts on the Michael Cohen tape?
Yeah, hey, Mr. Hartmann, just a quick observation. As much as I detest Donald Trump, when you were talking about the Cohen-Trump tape being edited, I think the sound, when you listen to it, right before he said, I believe he said, "Can I get a Coke here?" Then we heard that sound. Right. I was wondering if you could play it again and see if you thought that the sound could be the opening of a soda can.
I did. I saw on Twitter somebody mentioned that during the break. I checked my Twitter feed and somebody said, just a minute or so earlier, he'd said, "Can somebody get me a Coke?" And then you hear this, and which is what I thought was the edit. And now I've come around to thinking that's him opening the Coke can, and that's probably what caused him to stop himself in mid-sentence, was that he had, the Coke was ooh, good Coke. And off his attention span went, right? Because then Michael Cohen picks up the conversational thread. So I think you're right, Michael. And I think that's Occam's razor, right? Amazing? That's the most likely explanation.
Isn't that amazing, though? The man who controls the quote-unquote free world had to stop his train of thought, concentrate on opening a soda can before he got back to his train of thought. That's insane.
Yeah, it is. It is a little concerning. Michael, thanks a lot for the call. It's and spot on. I think you're absolutely right, and I'll mention that again in just a second. Andy in Portland, Oregon, listening on X-Ray FM. Hey, Andy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, just a quick comment about the what to do about the Fox News crew, which the people that only get their news from Fox News, which I do believe is the only reason why there's even a GOP left today. And it's what put George Bush in office, and it's what derailed a lot of what Obama wanted to do. But now it's like with Trump in here, he's even compounded the problem, because at least in the past they never attacked other media as being fake news. Now this whole mantra of fake news is making it so Fox News viewers aren't even going to consider another outside source, or everything else is just lies. Even if your own eyes are telling you it's truth, it's like it's going to be lies. So, hey, what about a symbolic sort of bill introduced by the Democrats? It'll never pass, obviously, but let's introduce something that maybe holds media accountable, and maybe, I don't know, organize a panel that fact checks news, and then there's repercussions for not adhering to the standards in news, which,
I'm really opposed to that, Andy, and the reason I'm opposed to it is that what if that panel that fact checks news, this is already happening. Facebook has hired 2 organizations funded in part by the Koch brothers that deny climate change to fact-check climate change articles on Facebook. That's how bad it's gotten. So what happens if Donald Trump appoints the czar who's going to determine, whether what I'm saying is fake news or not?
I know, and of course it would have to be constructed like the bill, which is going to be largely symbolic, would have to be constructed in a way where it was a, citizen panel even that was... I
think the way to do it is just to go back to what we had from 1928 until 1987 with the Fairness Doctrine, which simply said radio and television stations, and now I would add cable systems because they are using our public rights of way, so they are using our commons, just like radio and TV is using our common airwaves, that they have to program in the public interest. And what that means is that they have to provide, a balanced perspective of all points of view on the news. Just very straightforward stuff. And then we have news again, and we'd have informed people. Andy, thanks for the call. It's a thought-provoking conversation. It's an important conversation we all need to have. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A lot in the news. By the way, Michael from Imperial Beach called during the break and suggested that that I was hearing on the tape, the Cohen tape, was not an edit, which is what I was asserting earlier. I was suggesting I thought it was an edit because Trump just stops at that point in his conversation where he's saying, well, we only need to put it off for a few weeks or for a few something, and then it goes, psst, right? I thought that was an edit, but he points out a minute earlier Trump had said, hey, can somebody get me a Coke? And then he goes, psst. So it just like 2 + 2, right? Occam's razor and all that. I would say now I was probably quite wrong in suggesting that it's an edit and that it probably is him opening a can of Coke. And it so distracted him that he forgot his train of thought. Hey, we only need to put it off for hide it, bury it for a few, and let me have this Coke. Oh, gee, look at a squirrel. I mean, it's like that's how ADD works, right? So anyway, just for the record, I wanted to say that. And then Donald Trump is just gone off the rails. I mean, here we have Donald Trump saying what you're seeing and what you're reading. This is literally, Donald Trump speaking a couple of days ago. He said, what you're seeing and what you're reading is not what's happening. And over at DU, their graphic for the day, this is from George Orwell's 1984. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. Donald Trump, quote, it's all working out. Just remember what you're seeing and what you're reading is not what's happening. End of quote. Yeah, it's all working out. Jim in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Jim, what's up? Jim? Hey, real quick.
Hello?
We're down to less than a minute, Jim. You're on the air.
Okay. All right.
Say something.
Am I on the air now?
You are. You have been for 20 seconds here.
Okay. I just wanted to make a quick comment. What Rudy Giuliani said that Trump said is absolutely ridiculous, because if he said don't pay by cash, then Michael Cohen's response would have been, that's right, or yes, correct, or something something to that effect.
No, Trump says cash, and Cohen says no, no, no. I mean, that's obvious.
So he had to have said pay by cash, because Cohen's response was right. He said no, no, no.
Right. Yeah, I don't think he said pay by cash. I think he was asking, should we just pay this by cash? I mean, he just said cash, and Cohen's like, no, 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 no. You know, it's spot on. But whether it was cash or check, they were conspiring to conceal evidence that could hurt him in the election, and that's electioneering, and that's against the law. Jim, thank you for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls after the break here at the bottom of the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Gar Alperovitz's book, What Then Must We Do? Gar is an economist, by the way, and this is from the introduction. I borrowed my title, What Then Must We Do, from Tolstoy and the profoundly disturbing 1886 book that he wrote once he began to dig below the surface of what was happening in late 19th century Russia, a time when the system was in decay, the aristocracy enjoyed extraordinary luxury, and the peasants endured lives of hunger and pain. As a person of privilege, he began to understand something deeper about his time in history. Tolstoy wrote, I sit on a man's back, choking him and making him carry me, and yet assure myself and others that I am very sorry for him and wish to ease his lot by all means possible, except by getting off his back. Most of us do not literally sit on men's backs, making them carry us. We do, however, often uneasily look the other way, satisfying ourselves with modest changes that reassure us that all is well, while millions are in despair. We've done the best we can do, we might say, given the realities. Still, many sense, as did Tolstoy, that to actually do something serious would require us to confront much deeper problems than we are commonly willing to do. What then must we do is not shouted in the streets, but it is a question that more and more Americans, young and old, liberal, radical, and conservative, are quietly beginning to ask themselves in much more penetrating ways. So let us begin. My starting point is the obvious fact that despite its great wealth, the United States faces today enormous difficulties, with no easily discernible political answers that even begin to offer strategic handholds on a truly democratic future. Elections occur and major fiscal debates ensue, but many of the most pressing problems facing ordinary citizens are only marginally affected, and in many cases in ways that increase burdens, not reduce them. The issue is not simply that our situation is worrisome, however. It is that there are growing reasons to believe that we in fact face systemic problems, not simply political ones. Systemic problems in the fundamental, not the superficial sense. In the pages ahead, I will suggest that our nation's truly critical problems are built into the very structure of the economic and political system. They are not something passing in the night that will go away even when we elect forward-looking thinkers and actively pressure them to move in a different direction. I won't load you down with statistics at this point. A couple of obvious reminders, however. Not only has the economy been stagnating for a long time, but for the average person and the average family, things have been bad for a very long time. Real wages for 80% of Americans' workers, for example, have not gone up more than a trivial amount for the last 3 decades. At the same time, income for the top 1% has jumped from nearly 10% of all income to roughly 20% of all income. Put another way, virtually all of the gains of the entire economic system have gone to the tiny, tiny group at the top for at least 3 decades. Worth pausing to think about that one. What's going on when virtually all the gains for the entire economic system go to the top? I'm not interested here in criticizing those at the top. The question is, we can do that later, the question is, what is going on with the system when this kind of thing happens and continues to happen in an ongoing way, year after year, decade after decade? Another reminder, almost 50 million Americans live in officially defined poverty. The rate is higher, not lower, than in the late 1960s, another disturbing trend marker. Moreover, if we use the measuring standard common throughout the advanced world, which considers the poverty level to be half the median income level, the number would be just under 70 million, and the rate would be almost 23% of all Americans living in poverty. That is to say nothing of steady increases in global warming and an unemployment rate that, if properly measured, is stuck in the range of roughly 15%. At the most superficial level, Washington, as the saying goes, is broken. Give or take an occasional gain in selected areas, the political system is simply incapable of dealing with the deeper challenges. Its focus on deficits it focuses on deficits, not answers. Long trends that don't change are a clear signal that it's not simply the modern period of partisan bickering and congressional stalemate that is causing the problems. The trends are moving steadily downward. We're moving steadily downward long before the Tea Party and the recent partisan foolishness, long before the Citizens United Supreme Court decision allowed corporations to put big money directly into politics, and long before many events that have heralded as tipping points one kind or another. Nor are people stupid. More and more have a sense that something different is going on, both with the economy and more fundamentally with democracy itself. A few more bits of information just as reminders again of something that we're all beginning to see. A mid-2011 poll found that roughly 80% of Americans believe their congressional representatives to be, quote, more interested in serving the needs of special interest groups than the people they represent, end quote. Another poll found that almost 4 out of 5 believe a few rich people in corporations have far too much power. And only 37% of Americans, much more than a third of the population, have confidence in the most solemn and august of American institutions, the Supreme Court. I'm going to dig much, much deeper into all of this, of course, but for now, let's leave it at this. When critical long trends do not improve, when they steadily get worse year in and year out, it is clear that we face deeply rooted systemic problems, not simply political problems in the usual sense of the term. Moreover, as these polls suggest, people increasingly understand that something is really wrong. The question is, how do we deal with a systemic crisis, something built into the way the political economy works, rather than just a simple political or economic crisis? Garo Pervitz, what then must we do?
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Elaine in Chicago. Hey, Elaine. Thanks for listening to Chicago's Progressive Talk. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm calling about information I got from Everytown USA in an email.
Mm-hmm.
The State Department is planning to allow a company to post gun blueprints online, which anyone can download. That means anyone can make these guns out of plastic, so they can't go to metal detectors. And we have until Friday to contact the State Department. Everytown has a Facebook page which has a link to the State Department, and I think we should also call Congress on this. I only got this message on Monday, but I don't know. I mean, I can't think of any. This is insane, or else it's deliberate sabotage.
Yeah, it's both. And if you want to call your member of Congress, the number is 202-224-3121. Keep in mind you have one representative in the House of Representatives. You have 2 senators, unless you live in Washington, D.C. And but you still have a representative basically in each body, and who can speak for you, and tell them, no plastic guns, because all you have to have is a 3D printer. And you're absolutely right. This is a big deal, Kim. Thank you for pointing that out, and thank you for the call. I appreciate that. Matt in Elgin, Illinois. Hey, Matt, what's up?
Hey, not much. Just a second. I want to take you off the speaker. I know I got a short time. Really quickly, somebody made the comment that with Trump's idea of bailing out the farmers with $1 billion, someone mentioned that's something that Putin would do. In other words, that it's a Russian technique. Is there any historical fact to that?
No.
And the reason why I'm asking is that way then they could support their answer by explaining it, because a lot of people don't explain their short comments.
Actually, this is something that Alexander Hamilton would do. Alexander Hamilton and his 11-point plan on manufacturers that he delivered on behalf of the George Washington administration to Congress in 1791, and that Congress and George Washington largely put into place by 1793. In that plan, he said, on the one hand, we need to put on tariffs, and on the other hand, we need to subsidize U.S. industries that may be harmed by those tariffs as they grow to the point where they can stand, on their own. Now, I don't think that subsidizing the growing in the Midwest of grain crops for animal feed is a good thing. I think that consuming animal flesh, eating meat, is one of the main drivers of global warming around the planet, in addition to just being, in my opinion, immoral. But, I get it that there's people who disagree with my morality stand on that. But most of the grain that is grown now in these Midwestern states, these so-called red states, is either corn grown for ethanol or soybeans grown for feed grain or for shipping to China for feed grain. And if we were to plant instead in those places vegetables and fruits, actual food that humans eat, and Americans were to shift our diet just very slightly, just eat 20% less meat, right? Have one meatless day a week or 2 meatless days a week. And if you really think you have to have protein, have fish on those days. Aquaculture is much less harsh on the environment than animal agriculture. Then that would be a reasonable thing. So I'm not opposed to Trump saying we're in the big picture, because you're asking for analogies. In the big picture, if Trump was actually doing a rational trade policy, which would go through Congress and would be carved into law and thus would survive beyond his presidency, and so American manufacturers would say, yeah, hey, it's worth investing $200 million in a new steel factory here in the United States because we know that for the next 20 years we've got tariffs that are going to protect our products. If he was doing it that way, and those tariffs evoked protective tariffs on the other side that were hurting soybean farmers. And so he says to the soybean farmers, I'll bail you out for the year. And by the way, I suggest you move into other crops that can be consumed in the United States, like fruits and vegetables, rather than just growing export crops for China, like soybeans. And that kind of systematic transformation was happening. That's not Russian or Soviet or anything. That's classic. It's Hamiltonian. Before Hamilton, it was called the Tudor Plan. It was put into place in the 1570s by King Henry VII. Before that, it was the Dutch Plan from the early 1400s. These were the plans that built empires, that built strong national economies. And the problem is that Trump is not doing it right. He's not doing it as law. He's doing all of this by executive order, and he's claiming the right to do it by executive order under a national security clause in the trade, or exemption in the trade agreements that we have in the WTO and some of the other NAFTA and whatnot. He's saying this is a national security issue. Well, I think that with some items you could make that case, like computer chips or maybe steel, but I don't think that you can make that case on the export of soybeans. And I'm guessing that because he's so broadly applying these tariffs to large numbers of things, that he's no longer going to be able to hold this national security exemption, which means that the courts are going to strike it down, which means the tariffs are going to go away anyway, because he doesn't have Congress on his side. He doesn't have the Republican Party on his side. The Democrats have been the ones who historically have supported tariffs. I mean, going all the way back to the founding of the Republic, the founder of the Democratic Party, Thomas Jefferson, all in favor, the modern day Democratic Party, all in favor of tariffs. So, as I said in the last hour, it's just sheer incompetence, what he's doing and the way he's doing it. Do you understand what I'm saying, Matt? Is this making sense to you?
Oh, yeah, totally making sense. Thanks for clearing that up for me.
Sure. Thanks a lot for the call.
And it doesn't mean that I didn't want those farmers to get, aid or anything. But, yeah, thank you very much for informing me of that.
You're welcome. Thanks, Matt. It's good to hear from you, and I appreciate the call. Jonathan in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Jonathan, you had some thoughts on Jeff Sessions and his speech to high schoolers?
Yeah, Tom, thanks for taking my call. Every day I read something that constantly shocks me, and I read about his speech that he gave the other day, and the crowd started cheering "Lock her up." And I read further in the article. Well, the crowd was a bunch of high school students.
Right.
But 700 or 800 high school students, and he was at an event that was at George Washington University, sponsored by this group called Turning Point USA. And I went on their website, which, funny enough, is called TP. But they are training these high school kids not just to become conservatives, they're training them to be maniacs. And if you go on this website and you see them holding up signs, big government sucks, socialism sucks, They have posters that say fossil fuels save lives and big government pollutes.
Right.
And,
yeah, these are groups that are funded by people like the Koch brothers, billionaires with fossil fuel assets, and they're trying to radicalize our young people and turn them into unthinking. They're trying to lobotomize them essentially, and it's succeeding apparently.
They have a poster of 4 presidents: Johnson, Obama, Clinton, and Nixon. And I saw this poster, and the poster said, the poster said petty little liars. But I thought to myself, why is Nixon there? I mean, he's Republican, and the rest are Democrats. And I thought they're probably training them to think that Nixon was a Democrat. I mean, This is how bad it is. Yeah. This is how bad it is.
So they didn't identify the party affiliation of those 4 presidents, and these are young kids who have no personal recollection of Nixon at all.
I know.
I mean, he's as much a historical figure to them as Calvin Coolidge is to me.
They have another website called Professor Watch List, which lists all of these professors and their personal information, and it goes after them because they're labeling them communists. I mean, this is like way off the rails.
Yeah. Yeah, this is how you take down a democratic republic and replace it with an oligarchy, which is what Jimmy Carter was telling me on this show. Jonathan, I need to move along, but thank you for the heads up on that. That's pretty awful stuff. Sherry in Independence, Missouri. Hey, Sherry, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm well. We have about a minute and a half here, Sherry.
Following the caller that just got off the air, and listening to you and listening to other people on free speech TVs and watching all the programs. And so I keep hearing this thing about the other networks and what the other networks are not telling us is like they'll bring up a subject and they'll have their talking points, but they won't go into the meat and bones of it. Like, they keep talking about his polls. The polls are showing this, and then the other day I'm riding on my way to work and I hear on this channel, well, yeah, let's break down that poll and his numbers, and the numbers are not 80 or 90. It's only actually, the 23% or whatever. Right. So this whole gaslighting thing is not just going on with them. You're also being gaslighted when you listen to the other networks, and they only give you half of the story, or they only give you half of the truth of the facts. It's like, they want to say that, they're giving us the facts and they're giving us everything, but in actuality, no, they're only giving you a half truth. And so you have to go and find the other half of the truth and put it with theirs to actually come up with the truth. It's
very well said, Sherry. Yeah, in this era of infotainment, where what we once thought was news is actually now cherry-picked stories to get the most clicks and the most revenue for their advertisers. We have to be on the web. We have to be getting our information from multiple sources, and we need to become discerning consumers, like obviously you are, Sherry, of news. Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're going to check in with Talk Media News in about 4 minutes, and then we'll be right back. And welcome back. Kim, watching us on YouTube in Portland. Hey, Kim, what's up? Hey, Kim.
Oh, hey, Tom. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I know you've been on hold for a long time. What's on your mind?
Yes. I wanted to report some good political news for a change.
Okay.
Here in Portland, Oregon, the public transportation system has just introduced a low-fare option for low-income people.
Well, that's great.
They've cut the day fare. Yes, TriMet. They've cut the day fare in half for low-income people, and they are offering a $28 monthly pass. So people have to apply for this, but it's an amazing development.
That is great. I remember when I used to live in Portland back like 10 years ago, that there was a period where TriMet experimented with totally free fares in the downtown zone, and they had to stop that, as I recall, because homeless people were using that and basically sleeping in the cars all day?
Yes.
So,
well, now they've given a great option for low-income people to be able to get around.
Yeah, I think that's marvelous. Thank you for that, Kim. And
You're welcome.
I'd
like to add.
Go ahead. Yeah, if you wanted to say something else.
A different point. What if we all register as Republicans and then we don't have any, problem being on the voter rolls?
Yeah. I don't think you have to worry about it in Oregon because, our voter, the voter rolls are not being purged in Oregon the way they are in red states. But that may be a useful strategy in some red states. I just don't. The problem is you don't get, if they've got closed primaries, you can't vote in the Democratic primary in those states. But if I lived in an open primary state, I would consider that, especially if I thought that my vote was at risk for being purged. But I think broadly they're doing the purge based, the primary things that they're doing the purges based on are last names, because that, there's in the Hispanic community and the Asian community and the African American community, there's a smaller variety of names than there is in the white community overall. So last names are a good way of segregating out those three groups. And then location and, which zip code you're in. And that often gives away, political tendencies, shall we say. And so I think it's going to be pretty difficult to stop them simply by registering as a Republican. I doubt they're even specifically going after people who happen to be registered as Democrats. That, I think, if it were revealed, could get them in big trouble. They think that they've got, well, actually they do have some of the Republican courts behind them in saying we're going to purge voters, or we're going to send postcards to voters to make sure they're eligible to vote in, the 91305 zip code or whatever it may be. And, hey, it just turns out there's a lot of Democrats living there, particularly, a lot of people of color. But, we're not doing it for that reason. We're just, randomly picking zip codes or, something like that. So, it's going to be a hell of a challenge, Kim. It really, it is a hell of a challenge. It's like, how do these voter suppression efforts they are being successful. They purged, Donald Trump won Michigan by 11,000 votes or 14,000 votes, something like that. And Michigan had purged well over 200,000 people off their voting rolls in the months before the election. So, not to mention the 80,000 people in Detroit who showed up and voted for president and didn't bother showed up to vote and didn't bother to vote for president according to the voting machines. And, we have to keep reminding ourselves of this stuff. Kim, thank you for the call. And thanks for watching us there, here in Portland, Oregon. It is coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by XChair, the XChair chair, office chair. XChairTom.com is the website, XChairTHOM.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by SuperBeets. More information is available over at TomsBeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com. or by calling 800-568-9889.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, THOM.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
I was just doing an ad for our commercial stations about Cameron Hughes wine. Their website, chwine.com/Tom, THOM. And last night, Louise and I were drinking a bottle of the Lot 614 Cabernet Sauvignon. It was extraordinary. Anyhow, Bob Ney is with us. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Alan Ratner's new book. Bob is the author of Sideswiped and former U.S. representative from U.S. House of Representatives representative from Ohio. Bob, welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you, Tom.
So what's in the news today?
Well, let's start with Pompeo, our Secretary of State.
You call him Pompeo. In the news, they call him Pompeo. You know the guy? Is that how he actually pronounces his name?
No, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, probably.
Oh, okay.
Pompeo. I've called him Pompeo in the past, and I was corrected to Pompeo, so I don't know.
Yeah,
but
okay.
Now, from the city I'm from, it would be Pompeo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But in any case, I thought maybe you had some inside information.
With Pompeo. He was, going to be in the process of a grilling in the Senate because it will be, of course, the Putin-Trump meeting and, what he knows about that meeting and some of the contradictions, and then they'll want clarification, where does he as Secretary of State stand on, the issue of, obviously, of the Russians meddling in the election, et cetera, that entire issue.
When is he going to testify before the Senate?
Today.
Today? Oh, wow. I did not know that.
Foreign Relations. Yes, sir. He will be there. And everybody's going to get some popcorn for this one because he's got a lot to answer. It's going to be based, again, on Helsinki. He's also going to be grilled extensively. And by the way, it'll be not just the Democratic side. The Republican side are going to try to score some points because, as you know, a lot of them are ducking for cover over the mixed statements on Putin by Trump.
Yeah.
And NATO and tariffs, et cetera.
Yeah.
So the other issue is going to be they'll ask Secretary of State, where are we at actually with our European allies, what type of damage has been done, tariffs will be hit upon. But also the president spoke to a veterans group just yesterday and talk about sending a mixed message on Iran where he says, well, maybe we could renegotiate the Iran deal, which is frankly impossible after what he's done to it. Which President Obama crafted a long process and a lot of people involved worldwide for that deal. We weren't alone in it. So then he made that statement, so they're going to ask for clarification. And I think the Iran questions are going to be a big deal because where does Trump head after this, especially with the tweets and caps, about the potential destruction coming for the Iranian people.
And does Pompeo realize that Iran and North Korea politically are very, very different? The issues are very different, and the structure of their political systems are different. You can deal with Kim as a absolute autocrat, as a monarch in North Korea. You don't have somebody with that kind of power in Iran. Even the Grand Ayatollah, he may have some kind of veto power over things, but he's got to answer to the other ayatollahs on the council, and he also has to, at a certain level, answer to his prime minister Rouhani and to the people who elected Rouhani.
That's correct. And Rouhani is the moderate, and there are a lot of issues, as you say, in Iran. That's a way different ballgame. On top of it, millions and millions of people that were exiled from Iran, families who have families back there. Also, there's a great amount of Iranians who absolutely love us.
Yeah, and live in the United States. A lot of these. One of my closest friends is an Iranian expat, and has family there. And if there was war in Iran, I mean, it boggles the mind. And yet, in 2011, Donald Trump tweeted in November 2011 that Barack Obama was going to start a war with Iran to get himself reelected in 2012. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump actually tweeted that. He has been thinking since at least 2011 that a really good strategy for a president to get reelected is to have a war with Iran. And now he's going to be running for reelection. I'm getting nervous.
Well, correct. And also, he has John Bolton, who is one of the, and at least in my opinion, and some other people I think in D.C., one of the most unbalanced people that exists in the United States government today, who has publicly called to nuke. This is before today, before anything has called, for Iran to be nuked.
Not just bombed, but nuked.
Nuked. And this is his national security advisor. So a lot of problems there, and so we're going to watch closely of what Pompeo says on that. And then, of course, the tapes, which are amazing in themselves. We're watching Rudy Giuliani backtrack on the tapes. I mean, people can listen to the tapes themselves. And, then candidate Trump told Cohen, quote, "Don't pay with cash." So does that mean you pay with check, or
well, wait
do
a minute?
you pay
I listened to the tape, and what I heard him say was cash, and Cohen goes, no. I mean, it's just clear as day.
Mm-hmm. Right, and but Rudy Giuliani is saying no, quote, "Don't pay with cash." Even if he said don't pay with cash, that is an acknowledgement that there was a payment.
Correct.
Just not in the form.
Which is electioneering, which is a crime.
Right, it's totally contradictory to everything that's been set up today. Yeah. This isn't just some, Twitter thing. This is a legal case.
That's correct, and this is proving his complicity in covering up information that would be damaging to him before the election, which, if it's not reported, it's election fraud. Bob Ney, thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, thomsbeets.com, or by calling 800-568-9889.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
Our Thom Hartmann University book review of the day is Richard Belzer's new book, Corporate Conspiracies, How Wall Street Took Over Washington. This is from the introduction. Of all the books we researched for this work, the title we loved the most was this one, Regime Change Begins at Home, Freeing America from Corporate Rule. We loved it because it presents as a hard fact something that very few people completely understand. And then he quotes from that book. Since 1980, America has been run by a corporate regime that has co-opted both political parties and shifted sovereignty from we the people to transnational corporations. End of quote. Since this book covers some corporate conspiracies, we will no doubt take a lot of heat for that and be deridingly referred to as conspiracy theorists. So we would just like to remind people that the phrase conspiracy theorist was actually invented by the Central Intelligence Agency, be used as a weaponized term with which to discourage people from seeking the truth. We kid you not. CIA document 1035-960, dated April 1, 1967, regarding the agency's concern about the reputation of the American government, in quotes. That document also suggested various tactics for countering, quote, conspiratorial arguments, which confronted the gaping holes critics observed in the findings of the Warren Commission, which investigated, in quotes, they really did no such thing in reality, the assassination of President Kennedy. Quote, the agency also directed its members to employ propaganda assets to negate and refute the attacks of the critics, end quote. So as you can see, and as the Freedom of Information Act release of that CIA document clearly reveals, the use of the term conspiracy theorist is actually a conspiracy itself. But if you believe rightly that Julius Caesar and hundreds of other leaders were the victims of conspirators, as they were, then you're an evil conspiracy theorist, right? Well, if anybody actually believes that, then you'd better read up on your history, boys and girls, because conspiracies are an ongoing and very common occurrence in human conduct. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Are you aware that many friends of Robin Williams believe that his suicide was the direct result of the prescription drugs he was taking? And that over 23,000 suicides are attributed to psychiatric drugs each year in the United States? Did you know that turning prisons into a big business has resulted in the United States having the highest incarceration rate in the history of the world, and the most are just drug crimes? Are you aware that the historic event of the toppling of the statue of Saddam Hussein in Iraq was actually a U.S. military PSYOPs, psychological operations warfare, program, a completely orchestrated event with the knowledge and assistance of U.S. media, and not a spontaneous event as it was portrayed by our media? Did you know that the Pentagon is sending $1.5 trillion of our tax dollars to their corporate buddies for a new fighter jet that's already superfluous? Are you aware that continuing to rely on oil instead of investing in low-carbon energy solutions will cost us $44 trillion due to climate change? Did you know that companies like General Motors at times know that their products will kill people, but they do nothing because it's actually cheaper to compensate the victims than it is to correct the problem? Then read and learn on, friends. American corporations have been getting away with murder, literally, for many, many years. Just take a good look at their history. The above example of GM is a proven point. Corporate consumer advocate Clarence Ditlow, executive director of the nonprofit Center for Automotive Safety, bitterly criticized the settlement. Quote, GM killed over 100 people by knowingly putting a defective ignition switch into over 1 million vehicles, Ditlow said. Today, thanks to its lobbyists, GM officials walk off scot-free while its customers are 6 feet under. Tobacco companies knowingly lied about the harmful effects of cigarettes for decades, even though there was plenty of known medical proof of their damage. They even knowingly hid that information from the public. Oil, gas, and chemical companies have been knowingly polluting our planet with cancer-causing chemicals and products also for decades, and they know that they're doing it. Pharmaceutical companies have lied and attempted to minimize news coverage regarding the deaths that they know the drugs will cause. That's murder, plain and simple. Maybe you can paint a public relations damage control over that landscape if you happen to have all their tons of money and paid political influence, but it's still murder. Look at the parents of one of their victims straight in the eye and try and tell them it's not murder. Do you honestly think they'll listen to you? This book is an effort to reveal the insanity of corporate greed once and for all. At this point, most people probably care more about their local football team than they do about the workings of our democratic republic. And while we understand their frustration and their reasons, that's not good enough, folks. We have to all get involved to stop these bastards from getting away with what they've been getting away with for far too long. They're robbing us blind, poisoning our planet, hijacking our democracy, and ruining the futures of our children and grandchildren. They must be stopped. As an agent of the U.S. government employed to implement policies to benefit U.S. corporations, John Perkins noted in his classic work, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, that corporate America has extended its rule beyond our borders. Quoting from Perkins, what we had previously considered U.S. corporations were now truly international, even from a legal standpoint. Many of them were incorporated in a multitude of countries. They could pick and choose from an assortment of rules and regulations under which to conduct their activities, and the multitude of globalizing trade agreements and organizations made this even easier. Corporatocracy had become a fact, and it increasingly exerted itself as the single major influence on world economics and politics. Sad to make this observation, but we have become a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. 6 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's functionally the top of the hour, the beginning of our third hour. And I wanted to talk about taxes and wages for a minute. And some of you have heard this rant before, but it's worth revisiting in the context of what's going on right now. Elizabeth Warren was interviewed recently on CNBC. John Harwood sat down. John Harwood, of course, a conservative Republican, sat down with Elizabeth Warren and said, do you want to see these corporate tax cuts repealed? And she said, yes. And he said, back to 35%? And she said, it's not about the number. She said, you know, here's how I look at budgets and taxes. They're at the heart of this. A lot of people think they're just numbers. They're not. They are an expression of our values. The values of the Republican Party that passed those tax cuts are to give $1.5 trillion away to the richest Americans and the biggest corporations and let everybody else pick up the crumbs. I think the right way to think about this is we need a budget and we need a tax bill that works for all of us. So what I'd like to see is us strengthen America's middle class. But John Harwood is stuck on this, you know, how much tax do I have to pay as a rich Republican? So he goes back to, what's too high for the top personal rate? And she says, again, it's not about a number. That's what negotiations are all about. But he wants a number. So he says, is 50% obviously too high? And she said, that's why you sit down and negotiate the numbers. And then he says, when Bush was president, his team articulated the view that it was a matter of right and wrong, that you shouldn't have more than a third of your income taken. Do you feel similarly that it's wrong for more than half of somebody's marginal income to be taken? Now, at that point, she could have said, well, that's only going to happen for less than 1% of the American public. And 99% of people who are paying income taxes are never going to see a 50% tax cut rate or a tax rate, because that's the point, you know, at which you start making millions of dollars a year. And so, yes, if you've made your first million this year, you're going to be taxed 50% on your second million or maybe on your fourth million. I'm okay with that, which is how I would have said it. But instead, what she said is, quote, look, there was a time in a very prosperous America, an America that was growing a middle class, an America in which working families were doing better generation after generation after generation, where the top marginal rate was well above 50%, which is absolutely true. And John Harwood, says 90%. And she says, that's exactly right. But for me, the heart of the question is, you've got to ask, what constitutes a fair share in this economy? It depends in part on what the economy is. And she is so spot on. Although the headline by this, by the transcript by Jim Hoft over at the Gateway Pundit is "Fake Indian Elizabeth Warren suggests 50% Democrat tax rates." This is the kind of unthinking crap that comes out of the bottom feeders in the right. But the reality, the simple reality that most Americans don't have any idea about. And yet the proof is right in front of us. And if left-wing think tanks would be pushing this more aggressively, the way right-wing think tanks push their memes, it would be a good thing for all of us. The simple reality is that when taxes on average working people, when taxes on working people go down, paychecks go down. It's that simple. And we're seeing it right now. Wages are down over last year. Just in the last 12 months, average working people's wages in the United States have dropped a little less than 1%. Now, why would that be? The economy is roaring along. There's people, employers competing for employees. Why aren't they offering more money? Well, the tax cut bill, the GOP tax scam, did actually give a tax cut to people making over $25,000 a year. I mean, it was a small, it was $50 here, $100 here, maybe $300 there. Somebody making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 might be seeing $2,000 or $3,000 more in their paycheck. Of course, if you're, one of the Koch brothers, or if you're, Donald Trump or his kids, you're seeing literally billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars in tax cuts because of the progressive nature of the tax system. But there was a tax cut for working class people. And that's why their wages are going down. Because their employers know that what people work for is after-tax revenue. When people are looking for a job, they're not saying to themselves, I've got to make $30,000 a year or I won't be able to survive, gross, $30,000 gross. They're thinking, I've got to make $30,000 after taxes, or 20 or 50 or whatever it may be, depending on where they live, what they do, what their skills are, what their background is. And so if taxes go down, then after-tax income goes up. Now, for short-term stimulus, that's a desirable thing. Obama did that for 2 years right after the Bush crash, the Republican Great great crash of 2007, 2008, Obama said, we're going to suspend payments into the Social Security Trust Fund. Or we're going to drop the Social Security tax by 2% for a year and then by 1% for another year. And the result of that was that more money went into the hands of working people and it stimulated the economy. But it didn't raise wages either. Wages went down during that period of time. When you reduce taxes on people, wages go down because employers know that they've got more money in their pocket. They don't need to give them a raise. And when they hire new people, they can hire them at, say the taxes went down 3%. So the new pay rate at that company becomes 3% lower than it used to be for new hires, which is why we're exactly what's happening. Now, on the other side of that, what happens when taxes go up? What if the top tax rate on working people was, as John Harwood was trying to imply, 50%? What if you or me making, under 100 grand a year, under 50 grand a year, were to say, start having to pay 50% income tax? Well, you'd have a situation like you do in Denmark, where McDonald's starts out brand new workers at about $20 an hour. Excuse me, $28 an hour. And the reason why is because 50% of that's going to taxes. So after the tax, they're making $14 an hour, which is a living wage in Denmark. The employers have figured it out, the employees have figured it out, the government's figured it out, and with the other 50% of that money, the government is providing people in Denmark, Danes, that you can't just go to college for free. You get paid to go to college for free. You get a $200 a month stipend to help pay for your books and your housing and your food when you go to college in Denmark. You get a stipend when you go to a trade school in Denmark. You have absolutely free health care, which covers vision and dental and mental health care and everything, your entire life from birth to death. They've got excellent retirement facilities for elderly people in Denmark. I mean, they have a strong democratic socialist nation with high taxes. And what does that produce? High wages for working people. But it also means that if somebody's looking at 50% of their taxes, being taken by the government, in quotes, okay, cool, I'm making 60, I'm taking home 30, I'm making 100, I'm taking home 50, I'm making 200,000 a year, I'm taking home $100,000 a year. But when you start making like $5 or $10 million a year, so you're taking $5 million a year and $5 million is being taken by the government, at that point you're saying, instead of giving that money to the government, maybe I should reinvest that in my company. Because I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a business person, and I'd like to see my company grow. So I'm going to buy some new equipment to make my business more successful. So this is how tax cuts work for average working people. When taxes go down, wages go down. When taxes go up, wages go up for average working people. Now, it's the exact opposite for very rich people. And don't you find it interesting that most Americans think that exact opposite is how it affects them? For billionaires who are setting their own wages, and multimillionaires who are setting their own wages, by and large, when taxes go up, their income goes down, or they have to raise their wages, take more money out of their companies, which they don't like to do. And their boards of directors are not happy about it. So when taxes go up, their wages go down. And when taxes go down, their take-home goes up because they're setting their own pay. So, the reality of how taxes affect average working people and the reality of how taxes affect the top 1% are literally completely different, or maybe the top 3% are literally completely different. And Americans fail to understand this. So, this is a simple fact that is known by every European. Everybody in Europe understands this. It reminds me again of that story I've told many, many times. I was so startled by this. I was traveling someplace and I was up, couldn't sleep, and up at 2 o'clock in the morning, turned on the TV, and I'm watching a live Bloomberg show from Singapore, where an American reporter who works for Bloomberg and who lives in Singapore, I believe he worked for Bloomberg, is interviewing a German businessman, a wealthy German businessman, a dynastic German, he owns a big company, he's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And the reporter starts out by saying, "Sir, how much do you pay in income taxes?" And he says, "Oh, I don't know, it's fairly high." And the reporter says, "It's over 50%?" And the guy says, "I think it's in that neighborhood." And the reporter says, well, how can you stand paying such high taxes? And he goes, it's not a problem for me. And so they, and he changes the subject, right? The businessman, I'm far more concerned about the cost of steel or something like that, which is what he was supposed to be being interviewed on. And so they talk about that for a few minutes. And then the reporter comes back to it. It's like a stone in his shoe, he can't ignore it. And he says, you're paying 50% income taxes. I don't understand why you're not outraged. And the guy says, well, I'm not outraged. It's fine with me. And he changes the subject again. And finally, like 10 minutes into the interview, toward the end of this interview, the reporter comes back to it again, this American. I can't understand why you're okay with paying 50% income taxes. And the businessman pauses for a moment. You could just see the gears moving in his head. He pauses for a moment, and he looks this reporter right in the eye, right on the camera, looks him right in the eye. And he says, I'm happy to pay the taxes I pay because I don't want to be a rich man in a poor country. And that reporter was just like shocked. It obviously never even occurred to him that taxes are what funds government, and government is what provides the infrastructure, the soil in which we plant our homes, we plant our families, we plant our businesses. This is provided by government. But the big government guys want to make sure that that soil is very, very thin because they've already got their $1 billion. Right? There's a huge I got mine, screw you mentality that exists on the right in this country that is funded and fueled by very, very wealthy people who don't want to see their taxes go up. But the fact of the matter is, if taxes across the board were to go up in the United States, workers' wages would increase and the government would have the funds to do the things that the majority of Americans want done.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The absolute majority of Americans want free health care, free education, and a decent wage. We can do that. And welcome back. Sam in Englewood, New Jersey, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Sam, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. My question was around, every day we see some tape or some other scandal coming out, but in your mind, what do you think is the top-line strategy for Democrats to adopt to win the next election?
I think Democrats need to focus on three things and do it aggressively and loudly. Number one, everybody in the United States deserves health care. And the private insurance market is not delivering on it. We need to provide health care to everybody in America. Number two, everybody in America should have access to education all the way up to the level of a PhD or MD without having to go in debt. And however they do it, and I know there were some differences between Hillary and Bernie about how to do it, but they agreed that this is a goal, right? And there's a variety of ways to get there, but everybody should have access to education. And that includes shutting down the efforts to privatize our public schools. And then number three, that everybody in America should have the right to decent pay. We, the people, should not be subsidizing big corporations by providing food stamps and housing assistance to people who are employed full time. That's crazy. That we need to stop these subsidies and force the employers to pay a decent pay so that the taxpayers are not picking up the slack anymore. We're simply subsidizing the oligarchs. And I think that if the Democratic Party runs on, if any individual Democrat or the Democratic Party in general takes those three bumper stickers, free health care, free education, good paying jobs, takes those three bumper stickers. I mean, I realize there's a whole bunch of other issues out there, from net neutrality to legalized pot to the issues that have to do with gender and with race. And those are all important issues and they need to be hammered on. But when you run a presidential election or when you're running a major midterm election, you need to reduce everything to three, which is what Republicans have been doing successfully since the 60s. And the Democrats have never really done successfully, in my opinion, and they need to be doing. Make sense?
Yeah. But one of the issues I see is, with the whole Putin and Trump meeting in isolation, and then suddenly now Trump is concerned about Russia's involvement in the next elections and how, according to him, they're going to push for Democrats. I almost wonder if you ever think of, hey, did Putin coach Trump during that meeting, and now they're meeting again? So if they keep having these regular meetings, does that mean that Putin is de facto running this country.
I think Putin rolled Trump.
How do you represent that to the Trump supporters? Because I think at some level, we have to hope that patriotism would be one of the things that would pull them away from Trump.
Yeah. Sam, I think Putin rolled Trump. I think one of the most underreported stories in American media was yesterday, or maybe the day before, when Putin said, "No, I'm not going to come to the White House." And, that tells me that Putin got what he wanted out of Trump at Helsinki. He made a fool of Trump. He's now running around saying, hey, here's what Trump agreed to. And Trump has no way of proving that that happened or didn't happen, because Trump completely broke protocol and had this private meeting rather than having their aides and advisors there and having them work things out. It's just, Putin rolled him. Ate his lunch.
But why can't Congress ask the translators who were present in there to come and talk to? Because
Congress is controlled by Republicans right now, and they believe that their political fate and future depends on Donald Trump, and so they're not, the majority of them are not willing to violate Trump's wishes. Sam, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 23 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Andrew in Austin, Texas. Hey, Andrew, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hey, Tom, I want to dive a little deeper into a statement you made earlier in the program that the conservative base is shrinking down to that of just the Fox News audience. I feel like wherever that source of information you got from is overlooking the newer medias, like the YouTubes and podcasts.
Oh, I agree with you. I agree with you. They're also watching Glenn Beck, and they're also the Blaze channel, and they're also watching the there's two for-profit right-wing.
Crowder, Dave Rubin.
Yeah, exactly. Right-wing TV channels.
Well, but they're all really making a big footing in that medium, and with net neutrality rolling out over the next coming years. What's to stop them from favoring that outlet of their message getting out? And if there's like your show on YouTube, or Young Turks, David Pakman, Sam Cedar, I feel like the conservative base is just growing in every faction that's out there. And
I fully expect that if this repeal of net neutrality is sustained, and there's some really great people, fightforthefuture.org is working really, really hard, and they're part of a large coalition of groups. The majority of Americans want net neutrality. But if the destruction of net neutrality is sustained for long enough for the internet companies to set up their cable TV model, which is what they've been working towards for years, and we've gotten leaks from these companies about exactly how they plan to do it, that if they impose their cable TV model, then what you're going to see is basically bands of stuff, channels of stuff that you can pay for at separate prices on the internet. So they're going to say, okay, if you want to be able to access political video on your internet service, the political video will cost you $5 a month. If you want to access Netflix, that's going to cost you $2 a month or whatever. They're going to have all these different categories just like they do right now, and some of them are going to be premium channels and some aren't. And the backside of that is they're going to come to those people who are producing video content that has a political nature, people like me and people like Glenn Beck, and they're going to say, by the way, you're going to have to start paying us twice what you were paying in order to upload your content to the internet, because you're going to be in our political channel or whatever, and the right-wing groups will easily be able to pay that because they're, I talked on this program about the story that Ken Vogel broke in Politico 3 years ago, about how Limbaugh and Hannity are literally getting multi-million-dollar annual kind of backdoor subsidies from Heritage and the billionaires who fund them, for doing their radio and TV shows. And there's nothing like that doesn't exist on the left. So there's nobody who could support, if suddenly I had to pay an extra $100,000 a year for my internet service because I'm doing political content, we'd be out of business. So, whereas Limbaugh, no problem. Here you go, right?
Well, and the newer media guys are also funded by the same old money, Kochs and all the other conservative groups.
My point.
I would probably imagine NRA's in there too. And
my point.
Whatever fossil fuel you want,
and they'll be able to deal with it, no problem, because money will win out in that kind of a world, and that's why net neutrality is so important.
Yeah, well, I guess my original point was going back to the conservative base, not necessarily shrinking. And, I don't know.
No, I think it is shrinking.
Like
I think although I think, thanks for correcting me on the Fox News part. It's not just shrinking down to Fox News viewers. That was more of a metaphor for this larger ecosystem of right-wing hate radio, Fox News, and then this new collection of several right-wing television networks that have emerged on the internet. Spot on, Andrew. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. It's 27 and a half minutes past the hour. Our book for today is Into the Hands of the Soldiers, Freedom and Chaos in Egypt and the Middle East by David D. Kirkpatrick, who is the international correspondent for the New York Times. This is from Chapter 1. Driving east from Tunis may be the best way to take in the miracle of the Nile. The road follows the Mediterranean coast for about 1,700 miles. Almost every inch of it is brown 12 months a year, rock and sand baking in the sun. Then you cross an invisible line at the edge of the Nile Valley. Everywhere is an eruption of green. Not even the congestion of Cairo can contain the riot of vegetation. For millennia, no other territory in the Middle East produced such a bounty. Where the yearly flooding of the Euphrates was violent and destructive, the cycles of the Nile were gentle and predictable. A truism holds that the histories of Egypt and Iraq followed their rivers. Medieval sultans dug a well, known today as the Nilometer, on Rauda Island in Cairo to measure the water level. The annual rise determined how generous the crops would be that year, and the sultans taxed the peasants accordingly. Farming was that easy. The Nile Valley became the breadbasket of the Arab world. Egyptians swelled with pride in their river. Whoever drinks the water of the Nile will return again to Egypt, the old saying goes. Egyptians also like to say that they have been rallying around grand national projects since the pharaohs built the temples of Thebes. After taking power in 1952, President Gamal Abdel Nasser decided to build a great dam at Aswan near the Sudanese border to harness the Nile for hydroelectric power. Abdel Nasser promised a dam more magnificent and 17 times greater than the pyramids. Excuse me. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles announced in 1955 that the United States and the United Kingdom would provide $70 million in assistance for construction of the dam. But he did not like Nasser's denunciations of colonialism or his refusal to ally exclusively with Washington. After 7 months, Dulles withdrew the offer. Abdel Nasser returned to Moscow. The dam became a monument to Stalinist engineering. Its construction displaced 120,000 Nubians, the dark-skinned Egyptians indigenous to the area. The lake formed by the dam nearly demolished the breathtaking pharaonic temples at Abu Simbel. UNESCO saved them by paying Western European contractors to relocate the complex, stone by stone, on drier ground. The finished dam stopped the flow of silt and nutrients that had kept much of the Nile Valley fertile for centuries. The depletion of the water devastated the farmlands downstream and the fishing around the mouth of the Nile. The slowing of the current led to an explosion in waterborne diseases like schistosomiasis. To fight the disease, Nasser's successors launched a massive campaign of inoculations. But government health workers reused unsterilized needles. That set off a hepatitis C epidemic that raged on for decades. About 1 in 5 Egyptians was infected with virus C, as Egyptians called it in imported English. Barbers spread the disease by reusing blades, so sensible Egyptian men carried their own personal shears to haircuts, as I did as well. The adage about drinking the Nile water lives on today as black humor. The river is so filthy that your first stop would be a hospital. Yet Egyptian school children are still taught to celebrate Abdel Nasser's High Dam as an unalloyed triumph. I think of the dam whenever I get a haircut, a parable of centralized planning and unaccountable power. I had the luck to be an American journalist living in Cairo during the 30 months when Egyptians broke free of the autocracy that ruled them. Their escape set off revolts from Benghazi to Baghdad. But the old authoritarian order had only hidden underground, not shattered. It returned to take revenge. A reinvigorated autocracy did its best to blot out the memory of those first 30 months of freedom. Let me tell you this story. Chapter 2, City of Contradictions, August 14th, 2010. My introduction to Egypt was an iftar, the ritual meal at dusk to break the Ramadan fast on a gritty day in August 2010. My family and I had moved that week into a one-story villa in Ma'idi, a leafy district about 6 miles up the Nile from the New York Times Bureau on the island of Zamalek. Both neighborhoods, Mahdi and Zamalek, are full of Western expats and Egyptian old money. I had a 20-minute drive to work if the streets were empty. Usually the lawless traffic made the trip more than an hour. Mercedes sedans and Land Rovers veered around donkey carts stacked with carrots or garlic. Families of 4 or 5 crammed on the backs of Korean motorcycles, and mothers rode side-saddled with infants in their arms. My wife Laura and I had hauled our 1-year-old's car seat all the way from Washington. We felt so fussy. I was drawn to Egypt in part by the terrorist attacks of 9/11. I knew the roots of al-Qaeda and its ideology ran back to Egypt. Also, I had turned 40 in 2010. I wanted a change from Washington, where I had reported for the previous 6 years. That was about the extent of my preparation for my posting to Cairo. I was thrilled with the job. Egypt was home to a quarter of all Arabs, had set every major trend in religion, culture, and politics across the Arab world for more than half a century. Egypt commanded the largest Arab army and held together the region. It kept the peace with Israel. After Israel, Cairo had received more United States aid over the decades than any other country, over $70 billion, at the rate of $1.5 billion a year at the time I arrived. The book, Into the Hands of the Soldiers.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
"34 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you, fair and only slightly unbalanced. I wanted to point out to you an article in the New York Times that you may find fascinating. It troubles me how thoroughly we are being tracked. Swami Beyondananda, Steve Behrman, and his wife Trudy stayed in our home a couple nights ago. He was on the show the next morning, and they're passing through, and they're old friends, and they stay with us when they come through Portland. And Steve and Trudy live in Santa Rosa, California. And then the next day after they had left, I'm browsing the web, and an ad for something in Santa Rosa comes up on my computer. And I'd given my internet access to Steve, and he had used his computer while he was there. And so obviously Comcast, not the website that I was visiting, but Comcast had figured out that somebody from Santa Rosa was in my home, and they were throwing Santa Rosa ads at me because Comcast is my internet provider. And I'm like, whoa, how do they're tracking Steve Behrman now in my home, and thinking that I'm, So, they're doing this through your TV, and this is why I'm pointing this thing out to you about the New York Times. How to stop your smart TV from tracking what you want. Millions of smart TVs in American homes are tracking everything you watch for the sake of advertisers. If that doesn't sit right with you, here's how to turn it off. It's by Whitson Gordon. It was published 2 days ago, and it's one of the 10 most forwarded stories in the New York Times. You can find it right off the front page through that feature. And, last night, we have a Sony smart TV and an LG smart TV. I haven't done the LG yet, but in this article, they tell you exactly how to do it. And boy, on the Sony, I had to go all the way down into the operating system and find the program. And there's actually a program on my smart TV that is constantly monitoring everything I do and reporting it to the company that sells that data. And I disabled it. I turned it off. So let me recommend that you might want to consider doing the same. Mel in South Central Arkansas. Hey, Mel, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I was wanting to make a comment about something that I noticed. You had a caller in the second hour that said that you could actually make a gun with a 3D printer.
Nearly. I mean, you would still have to add a couple of components. A firing pin, for example, would probably have to be metal.
That's what. See, that's what I was going to say. She was talking about, you could make gun parts with a 3D printer because they were putting they were fixing to release their blueprints.
Right.
And I was fixing to say, no, you can't, because just the pressure built from firing a bullet in the chamber is in the thousands of foot-pounds per square inch. I wouldn't trust a plastic chamber.
Yeah, neither would I. Although there are some really, I mean, they now make plastic resins that are as strong as steel. But I would be very reluctant to shoot one of those things. And I agree with you. But on the other hand, if I was a terrorist and I didn't care if it blew my hand off, and if the only piece of metal on it needs to be the firing pin that's put on the hammer, and you can insert that later, so you can get the thing through security, the only thing you have to worry about are the bullets. And, I suppose you could, put a couple of bullets in your lower body cavity, if you know what I'm talking about, and it wouldn't be detected by the scanner. Probably wouldn't be detected even by the metal detector.
I would assume they would have a better chance with a metal sleeve, but then, I mean, metal detectors can pick up rings.
Yeah.
So I mean, no matter what they try to make these pistols through with, if they made it like the chamber or the barrel out of plastic, they would have to make it so big. They would have to redesign the whole pistol around.
Well, and maybe they've already done that, Mel. Or there's a third option, and that is that you get a slide-in metal barrel, right? And you get a slide-in firing pin, and you keep those separately. And the metal barrel would look like you could put a ballpoint pen in it. It would look like somebody had a pen, and the firing pin just looks like a little pin, right? Who knows what that is? And then, when you're about to use the gun, you pull out the barrel and you slide it in the hole in the front, and you pull back the hammer and you insert the firing pin, and boom, you're ready to roll. All you have to do is get the bullets through, and like I said, the way that you do that is smuggling them. And so, I don't know, Mel. It creeps me out that our federal government is going to make it easy for people to print 3D guns. It creeps me out at the level of terrorists wanting to do it. It creeps me out at the level of kids wanting to do it and ending up blowing their hands off.
Well, what concerns me is, I mean, that is very good points, yes. That is something to be concerned about. But at the same time, what about these third-rate gun manufacturers who don't care for standards, using quality materials or anything like that,
right?
And builds, excuse my language, a crappy product.
Yeah. No, those are out there too, although they're not a large part of the market. But that's my point, Mel, is that cheap guns, crappy guns are not the kind of thing that people who are rational gun owners or users would ever buy or use. So you've got basically two categories of people who would be interested in making a gun with a 3D printer, and that are terrorists and people who just don't have access to regular guns, which I think would mostly be people under 18 who can't legally buy a gun, can't steal dad's gun, whatever. And they just want to have a gun, whether it's to play with or whatever. And I think that that's very dangerous. Mel, I need to move along to other topics and other people, but I think your point is really, really well made. Alan in Chicago. Hey, Alan, what's up?
Hey, Tom. First-time caller, long-time listener.
Thank you.
I wanted to comment on something you had mentioned in the first hour of your program. You had talked about the Trump-Cohen tape having an anomaly. And you played it a few times, and it certainly sounds like it's there.
Well, I'm increasingly thinking that that's the sound of Trump opening a can of Coke, and that he interrupted himself in mid-sentence because the got his attention.
Yeah.
Because about a minute and a half earlier in the tape, he says, "Would somebody get me a Coke, please?" And then, a minute and a half later, you hear this sound which sounds like a Coke being opened. So I'm backing off my conspiracy theory here. Although a number of people on Twitter are saying, "Hey, I heard it too, just like you did," before everybody edited it. The everybody editing, MSNBC and CNN would have to be in on the conspiracy. That's getting a little too over the top, even for me.
Okay, yeah. Well, I just want to let you know, I did pull it up. You said you tried pulling it up on your computer program. I pulled it up on my digital audio workstation, and the waveform of it, where that occurs, honestly, it looks just like anything else in the recording. Background noises, maybe someone tapping the phone or whatever. So
so that
come on that.
So that enhances my theory that he didn't finish his sentence because he had an ADD moment. He opened his can of Coke and it distracted him. Right? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Alan, thanks a lot. And thanks for checking it out and reporting back. I appreciate it. It's great to hear from you. Celia in Santa Monica, listening on KPFK. Hey, Celia, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I researched family history, and in doing that, I was dismayed to find several owners of enslaved people in my family tree. Mm-hmm. And I know the slave trade was an economic pillar of the American colonies, and much of our nation and my family's early wealth was created based on slavery. So I thought to myself, I need to do something to offer some recompense. So I signed up for a monthly donation to the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP.
Right.
I chose the Alabama chapter.
Which no longer uses that long name that you just spelled out. They just call themselves the NAACP now.
NAACP.
Yeah.
I'm behind the wheel a little bit.
Yeah.
My family owned
you and I
enslaved
both
people in Alabama.
remember when it was that, and proudly. But that phrase is no longer in use that much. But back to you. I'm sorry. Your heart's in the right place, Celia. I get it.
So I've been doing this for a year, and I like to think that the Alabama members of the NAACP helped Doug Jones take the congressional seat vacated by Jeff Sessions.
I think you're right.
And so I have my membership packet, and this is a very wonderful democratic principled organization. Their goals are education, legal counsel, health care, economic empowerment, voter empowerment.
Yep.
So it makes me feel good to be supporting them, and I encourage your listeners to consider the NAACP.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you, and thank you. That's a brilliant response to a revelation in a family tree. That's remarkable. David in Greenfield, California. Hey, David, you wanted to talk about the Cohen tape?
Yeah, me and my brother listened to the actual tape that was broadcast live at the show that started at 6 Pacific time. Matt out.
Yeah.
And we both hear Trump say, all we have to do is delay it 4 weeks. Now, whether he means for the number 4 or FOR is anybody's guess.
Well, if he meant FOUR, then that starts to make a whole lot more sense, you know.
Yeah, Cohen just before that says 2 or 3 weeks. So if Trump is keying off of what Cohen said just before, then he means the number 4.
Right, and what they're doing is engaging in a criminal conspiracy to use money, which is not being declared as campaign money, to affect the outcome of an election by concealing evidence, of essentially, an affair, but also, I'm not sure if there's a crime here. Having an affair is not a crime. Paying off somebody for keeping quiet about the affair is not a crime. But paying somebody off to keep quiet about an affair in order to affect an election and not declaring that as electioneering, that is a crime. And so, no matter how Rudy Giuliani tries to spin this, these guys are guilty of a major crime. David, thank you for the call. Well said. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls after this. And welcome back. John, watching Free Speech TV in Henderson, Nevada. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I've got just a short story about a lady in Milwaukee who wasn't allowed to vote in the 2016 election because she had lost her driver's license just before the election.
Oh, my.
She's 66, doesn't drive anymore. She's got chronic lung disease and a bad knee, often using a walker to get around. She took to the polling place her Social Security card, Medicare card, and her government-issued bus pass, which has her name and a photo on it. But Wisconsin wouldn't allow her to vote.
Because a bus pass is not part of the acceptable government-issued IDs, although in Texas, a concealed carry permit is.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they didn't come up with that one yet, but they do require either driver license, state ID, passport, military ID, Veterans Affairs card, naturalization papers, or a tribal ID. And the list is uniquely excluding the kind of government-issued bus pass with the photo that she had.
Right.
So,
it's because she's the exact person that the Republicans don't want to vote. She's somebody who's concerned about her health. She's 64, 65 years old. She's concerned about Medicare. She's concerned about Social Security. She's going to be voting those issues, and therefore the Republicans do not want her to be allowed to vote, which is exactly what happened.
Exactly. And Trump was elected in Wisconsin by fewer than 23,000 votes.
Yeah.
And how many tens of thousands of people were in her same situation?
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing.
It doesn't, I don't know, but I would say that she's probably independent or Democratic.
Yeah, in all probability. John, I got to move along, but thank you for the call, and thanks for pointing that out. And Leon, I'm going to pick you up right after the break in about 2 minutes. Dean in Los Angeles. Hey, Dean. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Good afternoon, Tom. Yeah, it's like 102 in the shade here right now.
Oh my! Global warming arrives.
We're getting too used to it. I had a quick thing. I don't know if, forgive me, you covered this earlier, but the judge in Maryland, Judge Mesquite, in the emoluments case.
Right. Yeah, I did cover it. He's letting that case against Trump go forward.
Yeah, I find it amazing. He apparently wrote a 52-page opinion piece before he said, and I'm tossing out your effort to stop it.
Right.
It just sends this message to me that, look, there's no way you're going to classify this judge as I'm, doing this because I'm a liberal judge or something. He's very clear about that it's a watershed moment. It's the first time this issue will be covered in a constitutional provision regarding emoluments. I think it's pretty heavy duty. I think it's.
Was he a Republican appointee or a Democratic appointee? Do you know?
I don't know. I didn't notice. I should look that up.
Yeah. I didn't know he had a 52-page opinion. I'm going to have to look for that after I get off the air. That sounds fascinating. It would make good reading, I think.
But so I think it's, as far as everything goes, it's favorable news to me.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. Dean, thanks for the call and thanks for the heads up on that. I really appreciate it. We'll be back. It's coming up on about 11 minutes before the hour. Stick around. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by XChair, the XChair chair, office chair. XChairTom.com is the website, XChairTHOM.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, THOM.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and
Welcome
Instagram.
back. Leon in London, England, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Leon, what's up?
Hi. How you going, Tom?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah, London. So, Tom, I've been listening to your show for a couple of years now. I love it.
Well, thank you, Leon.
And as an active Labour member party, I think our causes are quite akin, really.
I agree.
Anyway, I just wanted to give your listeners, stroke viewers, a brief kind of understanding of how the majority, and I do mean the majority of the UK, feels about Trump and his effect on the so-called special relationship between the US and the UK. I was on that protest march last week when Trump was in the UK, you know, the one where the glorious baby blimp was flown above the Houses of Parliament. That got a huge
Was that
cheer.
a florist who put together that blimp? I didn't know that.
It was, sorry?
It was a florist who put together the blimp?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Yeah.
Just an average guy?
But, do you know, it was crowdfunded, and they originally asked for £15,000. They ended up getting over £60,000.
Wow.
That's how...
That's how the blimp is coming to the United States now, right?
That's right. It's on your.
Okay, so I interrupted you, Leon. You were telling the story.
Right. I'm sorry. So anyway, I don't think that was widely reported. It certainly wasn't over here, but I doubt it was over there. That protest with over 200,000 plus people was the second largest protest ever seen in London. It was second only to the anti-Iraq war protest in 2003. So, you know, that was a huge protest. That's an indicator of how strongly people detest Trump in the UK.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, for every one person that attended that, there was probably 5 more that couldn't.
Yeah.
But also, when it was first announced that Trump was due to visit the UK, an online petition was set up to try and convince Theresa May to rescind the invite. That petition itself got 1.2 million people signed that petition. Now, that's one. But the UK's, you know, no, it's not nearly as obviously not nearly as big as the US, but that's 1/6 of the UK population signed that petition.
Wow.
You know, so that shows you. You know, Trump is detested over here. He really is. Sometimes we're amazed that I know he didn't win the election. Well, he certainly didn't win the majority in the election.
Right.
But we're amazed that so many Americans could be fooled by this used car salesman.
Yeah.
You know, I work in a bureau de change in the West End of London, which is like central London, and I meet many Americans, you know, that come in to have their dollars exchanged for euros or for sterling, and as part of the procedure, I have to take their passports, and I have a brief sort of interaction. I can chat to them and talk to them, and I've noticed that the majority of Americans that come in, and I've seen their passports, so I can see that they've travelled about and they've experienced other cultures, and they all seem to hate Trump. If Trump comes up in this conversation, they're even embarrassed by him.
Yeah.
But it's the ones that come over and have just come straight from America and maybe doing the London thing and then going straight back. They're the ones
who've never visited other countries.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you know it.
And they're the ones who are the Trump supporters.
Right.
Right.
And so, you know, it seems like the more you're in touch with other cultures, other societies, other ways of, you know, other communities, the more that you realise that this is a dangerous man. And
I think the British people are keeping careful track of what's going on here. In 2004 or thereabouts, maybe 2005, I was invited to speak at Oxford, at one of the colleges there. I have it in my head that it was Christ Church, but it might have been another one.
Yeah, it might be Christ Church. Yeah.
And before
that's where they do their political science.
Yeah, and I spoke to a group of about 200 students who were political science students, and I was introduced. I walked up there, and I was going to be talking about corporate personhood of all things, because I've written a book on this. And before I could say anything, one of the kids in the front row said, "What's your position on Bush and the war in Iraq?" And that they literally, as before he even finished his sentence, people all over the stands, it was like, prime minister's questions, all over the auditorium where they were yelling these questions at me about Bush. I was being heckled about Bush. And so I held up my hands. I said, I disavow George W. Bush as my president. I think what he is doing is criminal, with the war in Iraq and the black sites and the torture and all this. I totally disagree with all of it. And then everybody was like, "Oh, actually, there was applause."
and then
So
they let me give my speech.
Yes, and I can imagine it went down really well, Tom. But you can imagine Bush. I think Bush, although he was a very dangerous man and ended up killing millions of people, Trump, I think but he makes Bush like a baby.
Bush went into it intentionally for political purposes.
About dropping atomic bombs on Iran. He's a real different. But Bush had some sensible people around him. Trump has surrounded himself with megalomaniacs like himself.
Yeah.
So,
and he's incompetent.
The British people, They really do understand and they follow it.
I think so. Leon, I got to bail. I'm sorry. That music means that we're at the end of the show. But thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for watching us there in London. It's great to hear from you. Love to hear the accent. And don't forget, my friends, we'll be back tomorrow. But in the meantime, there are things you can do. You can be researching local activist groups. You can be checking out the Democratic Party, finding out when the next meeting is that you could go to. You could be telling your friends about this program and others that might help educate them. Whatever you do, do something, right? The Republic's at risk. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by XChair, the XChair office chair. XChairTom.com is the website, XChairTHOM.com.